i arwain gwelliannau o fewn ein ysgolion.
Diolch, Dan. Bore da, and a very warm welcome to Rodney Parade. I'm going to start ad-libbing in a minute, and Dan will have not said some of these things, so I do apologise. But one of our home of regional Welsh rugby. Come on, Mike, help me out here. Yay, jerseys around the room. And I promised Simon, I have checked, are we allowed to keep on with the game Sunday? So he's feeling bruised. He is a rugby fan in Australia, and you know, he was crying in his beer on Sunday, so we'll say no more. So I promise now, that's the last I've used it all week, but it's been a great one. So, back to the script. We hope that you really enjoy this exciting day of leadership reflection with us today, because it's a real privilege, isn't it, to get together in person, particularly at the start of term when we know COVID's sort of ramping back up. So none of that was scripted. Back to you, Dan.
She tells me, like, with the script right to Welsh, she just changes it all. But there we are. Feel like I'm doing a best man speech, like, no. Right, estynwn y croeso trwy'n galon I bob un ohonoch, I arweinwyr ysgolion o fewn i'n rhanbarth, I partneriau strategol, ac I dirprwy gyfrwyddwr addysg ac arweiniaeth dysgu proffesiynol Kevin Palmer pan daw y prawn mawn. I'n cynfeillion yn awdurdodau lleol ac i'n arweinwyr o Brifysgol De Cymru a chynrychiolwyr o Cymdeithas y Gweithlu Addysg ac i'n partneriau rhanbarthau ledled Cymru. Croeso I chi gyd. A warm welcome to you all.
So we extend a very, very warm welcome to each and every one of you this morning. We are privileged to have so many of you, of our strategic partners with us this morning. Many of you are leaders, head teachers, senior leaders in our schools across South East Wales. We'll also be joined today by the Deputy Director for Pedagogy, Leadership and Professional Learning, a friendly face to us all from Welsh Government, Dr Kevin Palmer. We also extend a very warm welcome to leaders from the University of South Wales. Beth has just arrived from the Education Workforce Council, and of course our very close partners from our regional consortia colleagues down at the back there with Deb, so warm welcome to you all.
Ers 2020, mae nifer ohonom wedi ymwneud â gwaith Simon a hoffwn fel rhanbarth ddiolch iddo am ei waith. Mae sicr wedi cynorthwyo ni roi eglurder i'n syniadau a'n gweithgarwch yn ystod ac wedi'r pandemig. Mae gweithio mewn partneriaeth fel hyn wedi amlygu pwysigrwydd dysgu o'r gymuned rhyngwladol. Mae cael llais allanol wedi'n herio i'n meddylfryd a'n galluogi I ddeall byd cymleth gwella ysgolion yn well. Yn wir, dyma thema amlwg ei waith, sef cydnabod cymlethdod tra'n arfogi arweinwyr I feddwl yn eglur ac yn strategol. Mae modd defnyddio ei waith mewn ystod o ffyrdd o well arfer athrawon a chynorthwyo ein taith I wireddu anion cwricwlwm I Gymru a hwyluso arweinwyr I fod yn fwy ystwyth. I hope the mic works for you.
Don't worry, I've got a big playground voice. You all know that, don't you? Okay. So,
before we hand over to Simon, many of you, I'm sure you will have come across since 2020. I'd just like to begin by thanking you, Simon, for your partnership since COVID. It's important for us as leaders to keep looking and learning from others from within, but also beyond our own organisations. And our partnership has supported us all as leaders to learn from his work internationally, and has supported us to navigate a complex landscape of school improvement. Simon's work and thinking has often helped make the complex more simplistic in a way in which we can deal with those many leadership opportunities that often present itself. Whether that be in relation to dealing with a global pandemic, who would have thought it, thinking about curriculum reform, or even making our leadership strategies more agile.
Okay. Ei gobaith heddiw I roi amser I chi yw tair. Amser I chi ystyried bai o'r heriau cyffroes yr ydyn ni gyd yn ein wynebu mewn rolau arweinyddiaeth ledled Cymru. Heddiw rwy'n nhw gofod I chi feddwl, amyfyrio ac yn ystyried yn geiriau Simon sut y gallwn gwneud llai ond yn well. How can we do less better?
So today we do hope to provide you with some time to consider some of those exciting challenges that we all face in our leadership roles across Wales and the world, by providing you the time and the space to think and reflect on how we can do less, but do it better. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me with me to provide a very warm Welsh welcome to Dr. Simon Breakspear.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. And I was just across getting a coffee down in Newport, and was standing across from South Wales University, and I'm based at the University of New South Wales. So it's great. I come from very, very South Wales, I've been telling people. And it's wonderful to be here and join you. Can you just turn to someone nearby, just sort of smile, shake their hand and say, good morning, you're lucky to have me here. Can you do that for me? All right. Well, I do want to get into it, and it's been wonderful. Thanks so much. We've sort of dropped on this Wales research study trip and partnership trip thanks to Education Scotland, who brought me out last week. It was wonderful to spend some time up there. And I jumped on a plane on Sunday morning from Edinburgh, came down to Bristol, and it wasn't looking good early on. EasyJet decided not to bring one of my bags. One of my bags decided I think it wanted to go to Prague or somewhere a little bit more exciting. And so I headed off, and then I thought it's going to get a little bit better. I've come to Wales to soak in the glory of a Wallabies win. So I had a couple of listeners with James. Don't worry, these were all on the table before we got there, I assure you. And I was just sitting back thinking, this is all going to go my way. And then, of course, about 1 minute into the game, I realised this was not the place to be watching a game of rugby in Wales. And then the next day I thought, look, it's getting better now, we'll often do school visits, it's fine, and went off to a terrific little school, and halfway through the presentation, Helen just dropped this in, Wales 40 Australian presentation by saying, oh, well, how did that get in there? And I knew we were going to get along just fine. And so over the Monday I'd been on a whistle-stop tour. I sort of regret saying to Deb, I'm coming for a research trip, I want to see everything. And she actually took me at my word on that one. And I've been in multiple schools, been working with leaders in different places. And what I was really hoping to do, and yesterday was a terrific opportunity, just give me a wave if you're here from yesterday. These guys failed the exit exam, they're back today. So it's great to have you here for remedial work. But what we were doing is just sort of sense-making together. We're trying to understand the difference between some of the ideas that I worked on with these leaders from afar. Some of them were surprised I had legs because I've been turning up on their Microsoft Teams or Zoom calls for a couple of years. But we're trying to get into that connection between what are the things that we've explored and I've taught, and how does that actually land on the ground of busy schools. And so I call this the sort of weekly whirlpool of demand. Has anyone been in the weekly whirlpool this week? Is anyone already paying the price of being here in your inbox or other things? And there's a sense where there is an intensity now at all levels of education. I can tell you someone who's in different places. I'm almost unpleasantly surprised at the problems we're having in New South Wales around workload and sickness and industrial action, and trying to get into positive, productive relationships with the profession around improvement. Well, actually, it was the same up in Scotland, and it seems to be similar here. Who struggled to get out today to come and join here? Who's feeling a little bit guilty about, I should be doing the work, I'm here instead? Well, this is exactly the context that we're in. So what I want to do today is explore some of my practical work that might help us rise up a little bit. That might help us rise up around some of these challenges that we're facing. And as in all my work, what I try to do is to take something that I'm puzzling over, something that I don't quite understand, why are we doing it this way? And then I want to offer some concepts and some frames that might let you explore whether or not there might be a better way in the context. Can I just say, I'll get a lot of things in context wrong today. I'm the outsider, I'm the visitor. I'll speak Welsh education with an accent. And I'm kind of learning alongside you all here. And what I'm really hoping is to not give you any answers today, because I don't have any, but I might have some frames, some tools, some processes that you might be able to adapt and adjust and then make yours. Whether you're here in the southeast or whether you're from elsewhere across Wales, thanks so much for the big effort. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So let's get into the work. If you want to grab your booklets in front of you, grab one of those in whichever version you would like. It's the first time my work has been translated into Welsh, and I appreciate it. Put your name on the front in case someone tries to take your things later on after you've done a lot of good thinking. and get ready to move through a set of sequences here where we're moving from some core ideas and some reflection into some tools, into some frameworks, and see how that's going to land. So the first frame we're going to do between now and our morning coffee break is this idea that I've been working on that I call the Pruning Principle. I want to kick off today by asking you, do you feel at all that you're in the additive trap? Do you feel in your part of Wales that you're sort of in this mode where we have serious aspirations? So I read in the policy documents to lift literacy. Has anyone heard that at all? You have serious aspirations to lift numeracy. You have serious aspirations to reduce the extent to which the disadvantage predicts achievement.
All right. The default here, as it was in Scotland, as it is in New South Wales, is we think we're really aspirational here around these things. What we've done so far haven't moved the needle. In fact, in many of us, we're treading water in that area or actually systematically moving backwards. So what we need to do is more. Hey, just turn to the person next to you and answer this question. Are you busier than you were 3 years ago? Do that for me now. Go for it. All right, just give me a nod if you're just too tired to even have that conversation. Hey, for how many years has this been true? If I had have asked you last year, are you busier than you were 3 years ago? If I had gone back to 2019, are you busier now than you were in 2016? Just nod if you think, yeah, no, it's been basically it. So maybe during COVID we paused, but it was a pause, it wasn't a prune, was it? We paused, we breathed up, and then it all came back, and a whole bunch of other challenges we're working on at the same time. And so we're in a situation right now that I call frenzied stagnation. Well, each one of you that I've spoken to this morning, it's been so nice to talk to. We've had some sort of conversation about how hard it was to be here, apologies for some people who couldn't be here, and all the things we probably need to be dealing with at some point today. As one leader in education in New South Wales, my home state, said, I've been flat out all week, I'm exhausted, and I don't think I've achieved anything. Now, when they say achieve, they don't mean I didn't run the school this week, or I didn't run the local authority, or I didn't turn up to keep my governors happy, or I didn't run a bunch of professional learning if I work at EAS. Of course you did all those things. But did you move anything forward meaningfully that shifts the agenda on the things that really matter? When I ask that, most people say, I hope so. This state of frenzied stagnation is just getting started here in Wales. You're 4.5 weeks in. You're not really at the point yet where sickness is fully taking over. You're only just this nice early August weather. Oh, sorry, early spring weather, I should say. No, not spring, you're autumn. Sorry, I see. I'm having, my kids were literally at the beach this afternoon, calling me. I was like, don't, I'm wearing a jacket in my house. So I was trying again. This early autumn weather. It's lovely. I was walking around till 6:30 last night. Claire was giving me a hard time. She said, were you out for a run last night? I said, no, I was walking. She goes, I was going to wonder about your pace. You looked very leisurely. But it's lovely, right? Out in the evenings. Felt like I could have a pint down along the river. When it gets cold and COVID and flu really hits, when people are not just 4 weeks out from summer, where they can still kind of remember the holiday, but they're 4 weeks into term 2 and it's getting darker and darker. What kind of state are we going to be in? Hey, can you try to do this? Make the pattern on the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the dark line match each other. Do so by making the fewest possible moves. You done? Some people are like, I haven't had good coffee yet. Like, don't ask me to do puzzles. All right. Who added some squares in their mind? Some of you are like that. Who added some squares? Yeah. Who subtracted?
One of the interesting things that psychologists will tell us when they do all sorts of studies like this is that humans struggle with subtractive thinking. And funny enough, humans struggle with subtractive thinking more so when they're distracted or overloaded. When humans are distracted or overloaded, they overlook subtractive changes. Now, psychologists do all sorts of funny things like the little graph I showed you before. We'll give an essay and say improve the essay. Most people try to add to the essay to improve it. Has anyone done this with a holiday agenda before? You've got a holiday, you don't have a lot of time, you want to make it better, so what do? You add more stops. Is anyone married to one of these people? Is anyone's partner married to one of these people? They're like, we have to make the most of the trip. So we should do this and then we could do this. And then you're there and you're like, let's relax. And like, oh, we could drive over there. I wonder what's over there. And what we do is we add and we add and we add. And often when we do that, we make it worse. You see, we're deep into public education systems. You know, the history of Welsh education goes back a very long time. But if you think about the post-World War II education system that you set up, we've been building and developing. We did the kind of build the buildings thing, build out the workforce, get to secondary education for all, lifting kind of graduation rates. All these things have been done. And they say, well, what are you going to do next? Because we're still working on a bunch of problems that look a lot similar to the kind of results we saw in the late 80s. And so there's a fundamental piece, whether or not you're sitting at a local authority level, whether you're sitting at a region level, whether you're thinking from an individual school or potentially a cluster of schools. If you want to move something forward, you better do something one more than what you're currently doing. Does anyone feel this? We haven't moved the reading yet. What's the one more thing we should do? We haven't moved the disadvantage gap yet. What's the one more thing we could do? And so when I look at what you commit to at an individual SDP level, when I look at the sets of priorities that the inspectorate will give you when they leave, just quick 8 priorities here to get done this year. I can't put myself to bed on time. How am I going to do 8 priorities? 8 priorities in a year? Oh, okay. Have we got a strong evidence base that lots and lots of schools have been able to manage that much change from that base before? No? More. Do it quickly. Do it now. More. Local authorities. More. Regional groups. More. Clusters. More. You feel it? And interestingly, as you add more and more, we fail to acknowledge that as you add more and more things, there's an overhead on each of those things. Not just the budget, but how many times people have to meet about that thing. Hey, you have to quality assure that thing. Hey, you have to staff that thing, not just when you first staff it, but then restaff it, and that person leaves, and then we've got to backfill it again. We've got a natural tendency to solve problems and lift outcomes by adding. You get a new counsellor in, you get someone else in the local authority. They think, oh, I'm the new one. Oh, have you guys ever thought about adding? Well, yeah, we have. We've been doing this for 30 years. It's great that you're here now as well, but it's very unlikely that your new, fresh insight about the one more thing we need to do, which is your kind of single issue voter thing that you want to bring, that's going to change the needle on these complex long-term problems. We have a misguided belief that it's the next thing we add that will make the marginal difference. We underestimate the hidden cognitive and time demands of each additional thing. The sheer management of the stuff means that some people, once you get beyond the school level and they're in the local authority level, if they're in a regional consortium or others, they will tell me, not just here, everywhere, they'll say, we are so busy managing the work, it's really hard to find time to do the work. Has anyone ever found that? I was in a meeting for this, we were doing this, we were reviewing this, we were getting ready for the review on this. Did anyone actually improve anything? We're trying to, we've got to do that on a half day on the weekend work. Why are you laughing? Because it's true. And we fail to notice that all the bits that you put together, in the end, it's the pace of adult learning that's the limiting factor of school change. And so we put layer and layer upon things, where I'll turn up to a school in one of the states I do a lot of work in Australia, in Victoria, and I'll say to the head who's under some sort of special measures and they need to improve now, and they'll say, yeah, this morning this person came into the school, so I met with them. Then just after morning tea, another person came to the school to come and improve us. So we met with them. And then in the afternoon, someone else for IT and some other compliance came in, so we met with them. So have I done any instructional leadership today? No. Have I been in the classrooms? No. Have I done co-teaching? No. I've been meeting with all the people who are here to help me improve my school. You ever felt that? And so we're at this additive point, this really interesting additive point, where I would describe many of the schools that I'm in and out of, outside. I've only, not this week, I've only been whistle-stop tour through some really outstanding schools. But where I work deeply, I would say, it's a little bit right now like, you know when you don't trust turning off your laptop? Because you've got so many tabs open? And you don't trust when it says, when I shut down and I reopen it, all the things will reopen? And so you keep waiting. It's about 4.5 weeks into term now. So for some of you, who's been more than 2 weeks since you've shut off your laptop? And you're just running that risk, right? You know you're right on the edge now. It's slowing up a little bit. And you know that you're going to plug that in for a staff meeting. You're going to turn around. You're going to get the spinning wheel of death. You pushed it too far. I wonder how far away Welsh education is from that spinning wheel. Open another tab. Download another app. Accept another set of cookies from the website you're on. Yeah. And in the end, you are burning up all your processing capacity, such that it's possible that you might be doing more than ever before, and you're less likely to move any of the outcomes that really matter. Hey, turn to someone nearby. How are you experiencing the additive trap in your own role and context? What impact does it have? And here's a little hint. It's super easy to talk about how all the other people need to stop doing it, but how do we also accidentally bring it into our own teams, into our own schools, into our own schedules? Turn to 2 or 3 people nearby, huddle on in. Where does the additive trap turn up for you? Go for it. All right, can I come on back? So give me a nod. Do you experience the additive trap in education at the start of this year? Do you experience it? Both the adding and the fact that you've got the compounding set of things that you've been working on for multiple years that are still here with all the overhead that they need to be staffed, managed, accounted for, inspected, and we're going to add something else as though somehow the next thing, there it is, that's the thing we've been looking for. I remember a friend of mine who was an education minister for our home state said everyone would always come in asking for the next £5 million. Well, he wouldn't say pounds, but you know. You say, okay, let's talk about this. What is the thing we need? We need to get this, we're going to get an instructional coach in these schools, we're going to do this. Okay. So tell me again why the first 5 billion didn't do it. Tell me again why the next little 0.4 role of coaching will be the thing that's going to change the numeracy outcome. That all the other collaboration time, all the other roles, and all the other bits we've put in place, that couldn't do it. But we were just missing that bit. So we add. And one of the reasons we add is I think it's a way of saying that we care. To not do something would be to say somehow we don't care. And that's very educational. In medicine, if they don't know what you've got, or necessarily whether they've got a treatment to help, they don't just say, well, we don't know, but we want to show you we care, so we're going to start you on something. We're going to use some resources from our nurses and doctors, we're going to fill up some things. We care by doing something. Is there any evidence for this? Have we done problem definition? Do we have something that could help this person? No. We've got a signal as an NHS, we care about this person by making sure we do something. It's very educational. What happens if we didn't do something in that area? Well, maybe we don't have a good problem definition and we don't yet have a good solution. So I wouldn't do anything yet. We've got to show we care. We've got to do something. And in the end, we get people busier and busier. So I want to introduce an idea this September in Wales. I want to test it with you. It's something I've been testing in Australia this year, and I call it the Pruning Principle. Pruning is a really helpful overarching metaphor for how we can improve things by cutting back. I'm not talking about cutting back because, oh, it failed and how embarrassing, we've got to de-implement it. No, we're talking about if we want something to flourish over time, then actually the principles and practices of horticulture might actually be very, very useful to us. In fact, I think we're very, very good at planning. We're very, very good at writing up our SDPs. We're very, very good at having another governors meeting to come together and all the things we're going to do this year. But do you have a language, a set of practices and tools for reduction? Or are you in the additive trap? So what do I think pruning is? Well, if I borrow off the actual horticultural element, it's a regular and intentional subtractive process designed to stimulate long-term robustness, growth, and health. It's a preventative measure that redirects energy and resources, bolstering overall vitality of the plant, fruit-bearing potential, while fortifying the structural integrity. It's an artful balancing act of subtraction and preservation. Pruning isn't reducing the amount of water that the plant gets. Pruning is not reducing the amount of sunlight the plant gets. Pruning is not about reducing the amount of nutrients the plant gets. That would be the equivalent of budget cuts. Reducing the resources and nutrients available to the plant. I'm not talking about that. Pruning is actually looking at the work we're doing and systematically cutting back in a thoughtful way such that actually we can make some progress. Many of us fell into the trap of thinking during COVID we pruned, but we didn't. We just paused. And it all came back. And policymakers were saying, oh, we can just hold that back from the profession, but they didn't get rid of it, they just held it back. And then the floodgates have now opened. And all the other things we're now dealing with at the same time. So we need to practice as school level leaders, as local authority leaders, as cluster leaders, as consortium leaders, we need to practice a new vocabulary. Hey, how could we make this better by decreasing? How could we make this better by subtracting? How could we make this better by shrinking? How could we make this better by condensing? We need a whole set of words that we start to use on a regular basis to explore the reality that, you know, sometimes you can make things better by less. I've been teaching hundreds of Welsh leaders over the last couple of years about pursuing fewer things. But now I realise that before we can pursue fewer things, we might actually need to prune back some of the things that are already there. So a couple of things here. Pruning. Well, why do you prune? Pruning is not about budget cutbacks. Pruning is not about giving up on things. Pruning is not about saying, well, that failed. Pruning is about saying we've got limited energy and resources, and actually we're going to run out of human resources before we run out of money. Does everyone feel that? You'll know that at 3:30 on a Wednesday, where you're like, oh, I don't have to be anywhere. I've got time, but I can't do anything hard. I just get into my inbox. We run out of those human resources first. Number two, sometimes we've got to cut back things that are going well. Often people say, oh, so we only prune the things that aren't going well. No, you cut back things that have done well. We've got to cut it right back to its essential elements to stimulate new growth. And other times it's about bringing structural integrity and alignment across the things that we've got. And I would say this is the number one thing we were working on in Scotland last week. They have a very messy middle layer. They've got their local authorities, they've got achievement officers, they've got their quality improvement officers, they've got other people coming in to provide professional learning from Ed Scotland. They've got all these people, all good stuff, but the garden has no coherence or alignment. Has anyone ever felt that in other systems? Good people doing good work all around the equity agenda, but it doesn't line up to be a coherent set of elements. So we've got to know why we prune. We've got to know what to prune. Is anyone here a gardener? Okay, we might need you to step in here and bring your expertise. But when you think about pruning, there's different types. Sometimes you've got to do the removal. And there is a time to say, you know what, this hasn't worked very well. There's evidence that it's not working. It's dead, damaged, diseased, or problematic. I mean, one thing in New South Wales that we spent a lot of money on was a literacy program and a whole rollout with instructional coaches that we later found out the person running it had kind of made it up and it wasn't built on the best available evidence. This was very 2014, 2015 kind of time. And so after 3 or 4 years, when the evaluation came out, we could see actually these schools liked it because they liked the extra person that actually wasn't having any additional impact on literacy. We had to chop it off. Dead, diseased, damaged. Do we actually chop things off, or do we keep them around because they're someone's baby? Or it'd be a bit embarrassing to talk about spending that much public money on it. Let's just keep going. Removal of dead, damaged, diseased, or problematic. The second type, for many of you, is about looking at things that are going well. Looking at your PLCs, your TLCs, looking at elements of your professional learning and say, hey, what could we actually cut back here? Not because it's going poorly, but because we want to stimulate new growth. We don't want those stems to become woody. We want long-term growth from this. So we're going to find things that are going pretty well and we want to come back. Or where might we just need to thin things out a little bit, restructure it, reshape it, and put it in its right spot? Removal, cutting back, and thinning out, reshaping. If you're a head teacher or a member of a school leadership team, this is some of the most fundamental work you need to do in September. Yes, you've got your SDP, also it's your draft SDP, it's the one you handed in, but your thinking probably updating. But before we can really implement deeply and well, one of the things we might need to do is to do some cutting back, some removal, and pulling right back to the essentials to create room for this work to actually occur. All right, turn in the other direction now, unless there's only two of you at the table, because that'll be awkward. What resonates with you about the idea of educational pruning here in Wales? How might the concept be useful to you and your team in this September period? Go for it. All right, let me bring you back. So if you experience the additive trap, and you're starting to realize you might be getting diminishing returns from every additional piece, we need more leaders across all levels of education to stare at that and say, should I just continue to partake in that mode? Put my head down, be a conscientious, work my long hours, be very responsive on the inbox, and just hope it turns out as an improvement. Well, my hunch is, in the context of increasing industrial action, workload issues, a rethinking of the very social contract about the way that teachers turn up to work. Many teachers have had a bit of a rethink, actually, about the cost in their own life and work, and they're starting to see it more like a job than a vocation than before. Is anyone noticing this? Yeah. It means before we didn't want anyone to work when they were sick, but they're more likely to be, I'm taking a sick day today. I'm more likely to say, hey, I'll stay home with my kid if they're sick. I'm a bit jacked of the system. I don't feel valued. In my home state of New South Wales, the Teacher Federation program and big push has been more than thanks. The signs, the Twitter, they say, yeah, thanks for thanking us during COVID, we want more than thanks. And it's a totally different now interaction between educators and the government, educators and the parents. There is this sense where they simply will not put up with more and more and more. In fact, it's becoming more difficult to get them to do the core. We're redoing our curriculum in New South Wales. Wouldn't recommend you touch curriculum, guys. We're trying to change curriculum across all 2,200 schools. It's a big system. It's a lot of work. We've got quite prescriptive curriculum about what you need to teach from reception, actually year one for you, all the way through, 5-year-olds up. The profession is now saying, oh, do we really have to do this? I was like, yeah, you probably have to teach the curriculum that the statutory body has put down. This is unreasonable, is what they'll say. So now for the head teachers, as you know more than ever, we've got to be unbelievably careful about the few things where we actually say, no, this is the work, I'm asking this of you, it's reasonable, and I think it actually can have an impact. Is anyone experiencing these things in your world? These things are more important than ever. So how do we prune? Well, one of the things is you just got to get in the habit of pruning regularly. This is not one of those Mary Kondo kind of workshops where I say it's time to finally clear out the wardrobe. Has anyone sort of had the magical art of sort of whatever it is, cleaning? The magical joy of cleaning, whatever it is. This is not one of these. This is not one of these moments where like you're going to have a one-off, oh, it's all pruned. No, pruning should happen on a regular basis, at least twice a year. And when we're just getting started, I would say prune each and every term. And what we're going to have to learn is how to prune things that are small. Some of you are going up and saying, yeah, I'm just going to talk to the education minister about this pruning stuff. Yeah, why don't you talk to your own scheduler, like you, about your own calendar first? Let's start there. Oh, no, I couldn't take anything out of that. So we're going to prune regularly. We're going to start with what we can actually control, and then bit by bit, put our elbows out. Pruning doesn't mean the total removal of many things. A few things. Most of the time, it's trimming, thinning out, cutting back to the growth stem, putting ourselves in a position to nurture new growth. So let's have a think about a very simple way of thinking about what it would look like to prune. And then I've got a couple of tools and some points for conversation. So if you think about pruning, as a little acronym to remember, First, you've got to prioritise. You've got to work out what are we actually going to cut. It'd be like looking at the tree and just having a look and go, or looking at your whole orchard if you're a local authority. Look at the whole orchard and say, okay, what should we prioritise for pruning here? Then actually do the removal. A lot of people talk about it. Oh, it'd be good to do less, wouldn't it? Yeah, it would be good to do less. Does anyone make a decision? No, let's put that off to next meeting, and then it's like back onto the additive trap. And then once we've cut, we've got to unify. We've got to bring the things together. This is one of the areas that we've got to do better at. Especially for those in South East Wales here, you've got an opportunity to bring unification at the regional level to say, how do all the bits fit together to get us uplift? Then don't fill the space. Has anyone actually given themselves a really relaxed weekend and then just accidentally just filled it with a bunch of social commitments and other things? Like, you're not very good at having space. But ecological metaphors here tell us to cut it back, unify, and then let it just go for a while. Resist the tendency to say, oh, well, I've got to prove that I'm doing something in the complex place by doing something. No, you've already made your bets. Let them grow. Don't add more, nurture it. And then on a regular basis, examine and have a look. So you could think about this like a cycle, something that you could go through on a regular basis. You've got this in your printing. You could say, hey, on a regular basis, we first need to examine. We need to talk seriously about impact and effort. Both of those things, not just impact and effort. And start talking regularly about what's working, what's not yet working, where are we up to. Number two, we've got to prioritise. We've got to actually do that work of deciding what to prune by how much. We've got to remove by eliminating ineffective and stimulate fresh growth. And then unify and nurture. A regular piece where at each level those of us need to know, what are we actually trying to do? But the most important part of this, subtractive answers only. I'd love for you to try this. If you're in a local authority, if you're a head teacher with your team, if you're working with an entire staff, and you say, hey, we're trying to improve this outcome, subtractive answers only. I'll give you an example. We had a wellbeing week for teachers a few weeks ago, and all these schools had big posters of all the things they were doing to improve teacher wellbeing. Day one, Monday morning, 7:30 breakfast for teachers. You can imagine in my household, my wife's a primary school teacher, she'd be like, all right, I can't do drop off this morning, you got lunches. A stressful start for her to get there to show you she really appreciates the bacon, buddy and some brown sauce. Which is what I want, Rachel, tomorrow at Coffeeology, up where I am. And they always pick me up before it opens, and I'm a bit annoyed about it. So one of the things we're going to do is to actually think about, how would you improve teacher wellbeing by just pruning? The next thing on their poster was, and we're going to have yoga at 3:30 on Wednesday afternoon. And the teacher's like, can I just finish my marking and go home? That would be great. But we always add something. We're always going to add something. How would you improve student attendance by doing less? It's an interesting thought, isn't it? How would you increase student well-being? Through subtractive answers. Oh no, we've got to add this, we've got to have this, we've got to have this, and we have that up on the wall, and then we've got this person, we've got this, and this. Are you sure? Have you explored subtractive answers? Or might a fewer things working more in unity be more powerful than what you've currently got? I find educators entirely overlook subtractive answers to their problems. And I think deep down it comes from a moral imperative to make an impact. There's something deep down that says, if I really care about this, we'll do more than what we're currently doing. And in doing so, you might make the outcome worse. So where would we start on the pruning cycle? Let's have a little bit of fun here. I always say, start your pruning with you. But don't go out to the education minister and say, oh, we have this strange kangaroo boy. I couldn't understand half of the things he said, but I just want you to know you should prune. You should get rid of some things. I said, okay, you could start there. But what you could do is say, well, let's just open up our own schedule. Let's look back on September and ask ourselves, hey, what are all the things here that I'm doing? And is this aligned with the most important things in my role to move the outcomes that I've committed to in my SDP or my local authority or in my region, in my work? And then you'll actually realise that often we can't articulate what are the most important things we're doing that are going to drive the mechanisms towards the improvement. So maybe we have to pull out the hand pruners on our own schedules. We start going through a little bit and just practicing pruning. Because it's interesting, it's like we want to prune the education policy, but we can't prune our own schedule. How do we cut back? Oh, but not that bit, it's really important. Sure. Yeah, we're not talking about what's important or not, we're talking about what's most important. What's most going to drive the outcomes that we want. Do you need your own stop doing list? Well, you go back over September, maybe this Friday, you sit down, you go, I'm going to go back over September, I'm going to write a list of things that I was caught in doing, that I mostly did to please someone else, that I don't think drives the core improvement mechanisms that I'm trying to activate. What are the things that might, in your October, need to come into your not doing list? A really simple one for leaders at all systems going into October, or all levels of the system, will be to do some pruning of meetings. Who knows that they probably need to prune some meetings? You're always complaining about meetings, but you're also the source of many of them. Yeah, you can start off by simple things, like just for October, why don't you try everything that was a 60-minute becomes a 40-minute, everything that was a 90-minute becomes a 57-minute. Why don't you just trim it a little bit, see what happens. What you'll find is people turn up on time now, they don't go on and on and on, and you move forward. It also means that you've got that 20 minutes to do the processing that you really need to do after that meeting to get everything done. One of the worst things, I coach leaders on this all the time, they do back-to-back meetings and they never have time to process their notes. And by the end of the day, they're like, I've got all these scribbles, I've got all these things. And you're trying to put, has anyone ever been in that before? You know, a speech pathologist or a psychologist will keep you waiting. They're not sitting there going, oh, we'll have seen that patient's just left. They sit there and they take the 5 minutes to take up their notes. Educators, oh, just send them in. Yeah, I'm done. Send them in. Getting more and more backed up, not processed, things not in the way. Even more radically, you could do something like the company Shopify did, where they actually said, you know what, we're going to have a 2-week cooling off period where we're going to stop all, for leaders at least, meetings involving 3 or more people that are recurring meetings. And then we're going to add them on one by one, once we can justify what they're actually about and who needs to be there. The higher you would go up in the system, the more you'll spend your time in meetings, planning and organising all the work. And everyone says, I didn't get any of the actual work done today. But what about in the strategy stuff? Let's do some tools and think about the real work that you might need to do here, particularly as you take off and start to implement your SDP. Well, I want to say that at the core of strategy is choosing what not to do, and particularly in education. There are so many things you can do in education, and people justify it by saying, it matters. You know, we're not really talking about whether it matters, because there's almost nothing that doesn't matter in education. We're talking about young children, people's kids. But it's about what is most important to deliberately improve next. And so I would probably bring in across Wales an annual pruning period before the annual improvement planning period. A strategic pruning period before the strategic development planning period. That we can't plan until we've pruned. Because you're actually coming to the upper limits of what you can now add without making things worse, no matter how good that new adding thing is. Who'd be up for an annual pruning season? Subtractive answers only. You'll find someone in the second minute of a pruning session and they'll say to you, yeah, but couldn't we just... is the right response to that. Subtractive answers only. We'll give you 2 warnings and then you're out of the pruning session. And you'll see some people they have no idea how to function in a subtractive mode. We've got to help them sit in that mode for maybe a week or 2, pruning. Removal, thinning out, providing some space, stimulating new growth. For others, this is about going back through your plan right now and asking, in a relationship, particularly those from South East Wales, in relationship with your school improvement partner, hey, did we do enough subtraction before we decided what to add? Is there anything we should just subtract here? What about this? In your development plan, how many of your actions are subtractive? So when you said we want to improve this, how many of the actions that you laid out were subtractive actions? Roughly. Just give me a number of fingers. How many of the actions that you've committed to your local authority in your formal plan are subtractive changes? Huh?
That's interesting to me. As someone who reads a lot of school improvement plans around the world, you'd be matched very well with that. They'd almost feel embarrassed. What do you mean I'm going to improve numeracy by taking away? What? Am I allowed to say that? Yeah. Subtraction is really difficult. We don't do it. Everything's added. Or I think you should always have at the front of your approaches, if I was advising your local authorities, which I'm not, but if I was, which I'll give you my advice for free, because it's free today, get what you pay for. At the front end of my planning process, it would have the top box. What have you decided to stop, remove, or reduce before adding this work? We've got to prune before we plan what we're going to add. And the funny thing about development, sometimes the next phase of development is about doing less. All right, let's use some tools, have some conversation about some of this work. Well, the first thing I want to talk about here in Wales is, are you okay with talking about things that should stop happening, probably particularly around things that should stop happening because they're dead, diseased, damaged, or problematic? Do we have a mode of talking about what's working and not working? And we're okay with saying, yeah, we had a good go at that. It was working okay for a while. It really isn't a good long-term use of our resources, so we're going to stop it. I want to say there's a range of cognitive biases that play out that often get in the way of pruning. Let me show you these, and then I want you to work it through with a partner and help. So I reckon these cognitive biases that turn up a lot in psychological research with regards to typical biases that interrupt human decision-making and discussions. Anyone who's ever sat at a local authority level in discussions and meeting, many of these things will ring true. Any of you who've ever sat with a head teacher and governors around discussions, it'll be interesting when these things turn up for you, because when you start to think about pruning, there's some things that get in the way and there's some simple excuses. Let me just run through them and then I'll let you work through how might these actually influence your propensity to prune. The first one is the sunk cost fallacy. This is a simple reality that once humans have spent some money on something, they put good money after bad. The normal example of this is if you buy a second-hand car, you think it was going to be good. A month later, you've got to take it to the mechanic and you spend 500 quid getting it fixed. A month later, it needs another fix and you think, well, I've already spent that 500, so I better spend this one. And then it keeps going and going and going. Has anyone had this experience before? Now, technically, rationally, we shouldn't factor in the fact that we've already spent an additional 500 quid on it. We should just ask, given what I know about this car now, should I spend any more money on it? We do this in education all the time. Oh, we've already got that person in that role. We've already allocated that money. We've already started rolling it out. It's really not working. It doesn't have good efficacy. We can't say, yeah, but we've already spent this much. So we keep it rolling. I see this when head teachers sign up for a 2 or 3 year program with a consultant. After 6 months, they know this is not landing. They start doubting themselves. Oh, well, maybe we'll just let it go a little bit longer. It's all right. And at the end of year 1, they let it roll into year 2 because they think we've already spent all that money in year 1. You spent that money to learn that that is not working here. That's a good use of public money, by the way, to learn that something's not working here. Learn that as quickly as possible and kill it. Please don't roll it over to year 2 and year 3 because of all the money you spent in year 1. Has anyone ever felt like this? The fashion example of this is anyone got an expensive jacket, shoes, jeans in their wardrobe that has never fit them well, but because they spent so much money on it, they keep it. You keep it every year, don't you? Oh, maybe I'll lose a little bit, maybe that'll fit better, maybe my feet will grow. And every year you move other things and you keep it. Why? Because you spent a lot of money on it and you think, why do I keep it? Because I'm trying to justify what I spent on it. There are so many programs, initiatives, roles, and things that we do in education that we keep around as some sort of justification about why we keep it. What does Mary Kondo say about that? She says, you've got to thank that item for teaching you. You don't look good in that. And I say, yeah, you had to spend some public dollars and some of your professionals' time to work out that ain't working here in that local authority or that school, and you spend that money to learn that lesson as quickly as possible. The sunk cost fallacy. Who thinks the sunk cost fallacy might play out in some pruning problems? Okay, other ones, anecdotal fallacy. You've always got someone talking about something. Oh, it's working so well with year 3. You should see it. I'm thinking, yeah, anything would work well in year 3. That leader is amazing. That team is incredible. They were good before you got here. You ever get that always talk about the any benefit rule? There's one school, there's one thing, and they try to expand that to everything else. The ostrich effect, people just don't want to talk about impact at all. Optimism bias, a tendency to oh yeah, I reckon this year it's really going to start working. Confirmation bias, you already know what you want to be true, and you go looking for evidence that supports it. All right, I want to give you 5 minutes here to talk with the people next to you. What are the 1 or 2 biases that you know you most likely play? I know I love the sunk cost and the anecdotal fallacy. I definitely have a tendency to bring those to meetings. By the way, knowing about these doesn't often stop you falling into them. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winning economist in behavioural science, said, oh yeah, he studied all these. He basically helped us understand them because it doesn't really stop me actually falling into them. But in the collective, we can. In the collective, as we're aware about it, we can actually say, are any of these things playing into our propensity to avoid pruning? Okay, let me give you a couple of minutes, have that conversation. You can use the table if you want. Go for it. All right, let me pause you. So if you're going to go on your pruning journey, firstly, remember pruning is only subtraction. It's not even a decision about what are the few things you will do. It's just trying to clear up some space. Often the pruning just gives you enough headspace to begin trying to work out, well, okay, given that now, all right, I can see things clearly now. So this ongoing idea that it's at some point every term, maybe every month in your own schedule, on a regular basis, we need to engage in pruning, not because things aren't good, but because if good things keep getting added to over and over again, we will end up spending all of our time in the overhead and very little in the actual work. We all experience that. It overloads our planning circuits, it overloads our meetings. We can give this illusion of progress, and that's what's going on across education. We have not moved the needle. What's an outcome you've moved the needle on in Wales in 10 years? Nationally. An outcome, not not more access to something, but a measurable outcome in learning. Anyone got one? Oh, don't worry, we're in the same, we're in the same boat. Everything we're working on, we've got problems with attendance in New South Wales. Get this, we've spent the last 150 years building public education systems. Now we can't get people to go to them. I was working with the wonderful Steve Mumby last week, and he was talking about a project that the organisation he was working with did in Kenya, which is all about improving the ability for young girls to go to the public schools. So both opening up those schools, providing safe toilets, safe places to go. In England, or in Wales, we've got the buildings, we've got the toilets, we've got the freedom and safety to get there, but we can't get them to go. Notice how we've done the whole educational continuum? And so we start saying, we're going to have to go about this differently. These are complex, interconnected problems. And one of the things we should do is just get used to saying, we've got to prune things back on a regular basis. All right, well, how might you do some pruning? And I want to just be careful here. I heard some great comments I was listening in, and people just saying, you've got to be careful. Sometimes things take a while to get going. And so please, I'm not saying like, oh, it's not working. It's been all 4 weeks. Kill it. Like I do, I go on a low-carb diet and I weigh myself between 8 o'clock and 12 o'clock. And I say, well, it's been 4 hours. Come on already, right? I've got to get into this suit tomorrow. And so you've got to be very, very careful here about not taking this as, well, if it's not working, we kill it. Yeah, but would we expect it to be working by now? This is where you've got to have that theory of change, a theory of action, and what would we expect by now? So be thoughtful about how you just add this one additional lens. But one of the things I like using is a pruning matrix, which for me is just about picking an area, just one area, and you start to think about what might need to be pruned. You can use this to your own children at home. You're like, you're not really adding a lot. You're on my pruning matrix. Some of you, your husbands are going to go on the pruning matrix. You're like, this has been the most practical professional learning I've had for a long time. But you can work this through and you pick one area. I'm at the local authority level. We're having a conversation. People are talking over each other. You've got your single issue voters or single issue councillors talking about, so I've been in all these meetings. You go, how do we just stop the talking over one another and actually stop? So I always use a tool. It's a third point conversation. The tool gets blown up, if possible, into an A3, or even get people up away from the table, away from the little UN table we sit around, get them a pen and a post-it note, say we're going to just talk about this area, just this area. And within 30 seconds, someone will start talking about their issue. No, just this area. Today, if you're a head teacher, I just want you to think about professional learning and collaboration for your teachers. Okay, just that area. Workshops, instructional coaching, peer observations, walkthroughs, all the wonderful things you do. And you just pick that area and say, hey, let's just have a little think here. Where would these fit? So the pruning matrix just offers strong evidence of impact, limited evidence of impact. It doesn't say impact on learner outcomes, but that's actually, as a researcher, very, very hard to track. What I'm talking about is, say, teacher professional learning, does it have an impact on teacher knowledge? Does it have an impact on teacher planning? Does it have an impact on trialing of practices in the classroom? Does it have an impact on embeddedness of those practices? Can you see this turning up in the long-term curriculum units of work? Can you actually get from teachers that they're feeling more confident about the use of this approach? So you can start with those kind of impact measures, about the actual person that you're trying to shift. Strong evidence of impact, limited evidence of impact, but then it's effort as well. Higher effort, lower effort. We want to talk about how much impact we're getting for how much effort. And so you could list all the different things you do. You can say our first full day professional learning days, if you've got those, PLC or TLC meetings. Maybe you've got some instructional coaching, professional learning goal setting and reflection processes. We do all these weird things across different systems. Lesson observations by peers, or lesson observations and walkthroughs by leadership teams. Are you guys doing any of these sorts of things? Okay. So what you do at this time is say, look, let's retrospectively think about the last year and a half or so. Get the school leadership team around first. Maybe many of you, at some of the schools I visited on Monday, were so democratic, it would seem to me that the whole staff would come in on this. I would never do that early in my tenure in a place that's still in a turnaround culturally, because people will just vote out the stuff that actually makes them better. They'll say stop, because actually you've got to do practice change, we've got to read research. But once you get the culture up and learning, then obviously you can bring full staff into this. And the basic idea here is you help people to list those out and say, well, what do we reckon? And here I am, and I come up with my post-it note, and I think, I think that instructional coaching at the moment, really strong evidence of impact, but it's very high effort. I mean, our instructional coach is barely able to get to 6 to 8 people deeply over a term. And you go, okay, or 2 people deep, okay, there. And you kind of just move it away. No, this will not tell you what to prune, but it's trying to get a shared understanding of where things fit. But then you say, hey, look, Simon, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that. Oh, really? Okay. I'm the head teacher. Oh, all right. Because it's not about my authority. It's about evidence. And someone says, well, look, I actually want to suggest that this is much, more moderate level of impact. I mean, everyone likes the instructional coaching. But what do we really know about whether or not it's leading to changes in the instructional practices that matter most in the outcomes we're working on? Because I actually worry that it's so much free choice. People are working on whatever they want to do, but sometimes they're working on things that aren't actually the most important things to get us to the outcomes we want. I'm going to suggest it goes over here. And notice what we're doing, we're having a debate around a 3rd-point conversation. Who feels like this could be a useful thing at the school improvement team? I mean, it won't always be enjoyable, because finally what people are really thinking comes out. But they don't just have to spur, do you ever get someone at your school improvement team that just kind of makes some definitive claim and then just shuts down afterwards? You say, what would you suggest? Where would it fit on the squares? And you make them grab a post-it. Where would it go? Oh, I don't agree with that. Okay, so what would it look like for you? And you hold people to account for what they actually think about. This is how we get to joint work. So what you can do is you can start to map this out. In a moment, I'm going to get you to do that. And then you can start to prioritize. You don't make a decision straight away. You walk away from that canvas. I say walk away from that for a few days. Otherwise people think, oh, well, if it's down here, limited evidence and high effort, we should kill it. But maybe it's actually something that just needs a bit more time. There's a good reason why it's high. There's not much evidence, it's new, it's high effort, because it's new, we're still learning out how to do it. But then you can move into the other tool I put in here to prioritize, which is you get people to start to generate based on that. Hey, what are some things that you would suggest we might need to prune? Staff love doing this, by the way. If you're a new head with high expectations, they'll put you on that list. And this is why I'm saying, be careful about how quickly you hand this out. Especially if people think it's a democracy and whatever they put in, then you're meant to act on. You've got to get the culture at an improvement level first. But on this tool, you can say, hey, as a school improvement team, or as a local authority, or as an EAS sub-team, you could work together and you could say, hey, what could we completely remove? Is there any? We put them in a cab rank. Which ones we've got here? We're not even deciding we're going to cut it yet. What could we completely remove? And what's the order in which we try to remove them if we could? Hey, what do we want to cut back? Not because it's not going well, but because we want to stimulate rejuvenation and renewal and new fruit. And where there's some areas here, like what I was saying in the Scottish Middle, we've got to reshape and thin and enhance for structural integrity. No one's saying they're not good things, but they're not working well in coherence and alignment yet. So we need to make sure the bits are working well together. A really simple set of 2 tools. One of them mapping out where things are. Second thing, actually asking without deciding. People will be much more willing to put out ideas if the decision happens later on. It's really important to separate the examining, the prioritising, walk it away, and then say which points here are we actually now able to make a decision. Make sense? Okay, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. In order to get more coffee and whatever else we're being fed at 11 o'clock, I need to see some activity on one of these. Now, I can promise you, Deb and the team are going to send you out digital versions of all my slides and this. So some of you are like, I don't want to write on mine. It's really nice. Is anyone one of those? It looks so nice. It looks so nice. So, just steal some of the spare ones. We've got a few. And number 2, just show me that you could start to play around by writing out where would you currently put different areas of if you're a school-based leader today, professional learning for teachers. Roughly, where would it sit? Of all the activities you've got, probably got 3 to 6 things going on, where would it roughly sit? And don't go, oh, I don't want to put it in there, then we might have to prune it. No. We're just getting a shared understanding of the nature of the work. No decisions. And even that, there's another step. And then we're going to rank order what we might prune. And then that gives people freedom to just sit. Okay, so we don't have to do it? No, we might get rid of it. We're not doing that yet. It's like, you know when you really need to clean something up, but you put it in the garage instead? Right? So for me, like we can get a council clean up if we need to, get. So what you do is you get rid of some things that are easy. But there's other things like, I'm not quite, I know we're not going to use this anymore, and so what do you put it in the garage or the attic, or if you've got another room you put it in? And you know it's going to go, but emotionally you're not ready yet. That's what this is about. And then the next council cleanup, you can say, all right, I'm ready. Yeah, we haven't used it for 2.5 years. That's true. All right. Oh, maybe the next one. Just start to talk about it. All right, have a go with the tool. I'll come around to your tables. Some of them will land with you and be really useful. Some of you say, oh yeah, we're kind of already doing that, but it's a helpful tool. And others you'll be thinking, no thanks, that's not for us. That's absolutely fine with me. So pruning, our first big idea, is something that I'd love to see take off in the discourse across Wales. Across Southeast Wales, where we've got the majority of our colleagues here today, we'd love for you to be using the concept on a regular basis. Test it out with your team. I'll tell you, from the work that I do, it's one of the easiest things as a head teacher, as a senior leader in a school, to say, I was wondering whether we could have a meeting today about what we could stop doing. We'll go, yeah. And then they'll laugh and they'll look at you and go, you? Stop doing? I'm like, yeah. We're going to have a process. We're going to talk seriously about it. And we're going to start with things that we feel really comfortable about. Let's take 2 meetings and move them from 1 hour to 40 minutes. We've just handed everyone 40 minutes back. Ooh, it gets addictive. How many more of those could we do? What else could we prune? Are there any things here that we kind of look at like, we don't even know who started that? Has anyone got the, I call it ghosts of principals past, but ghosts of head teachers past? That 2 or 3 head teachers ago, someone solved a problem that you no longer have, but the solution to that problem is still around. But you never really thought to do anything with it. It's just been around. So prune it. Bye-bye. Unless you can get a through line to impact, prune it. You don't even have to say what you're going to reuse those resources for, because the whole point is to start to save resources and energy on the things that matter most, stimulate fresh growth, and then get the things aligned. Sometimes, honestly, I can get more improvement in places just by cutting back a few things so they all line up. All right. You've got to continually prune. Pruning hasn't happened for a very long time across Wales. This is an overgrown orchard. Fruit is therefore becoming less and less frequent, less quality, less quantity. It's time to prune. Not because things are bad, but because they could be much better if you apply the pruning principle. All right. Let's get into our session 2. This session is going to be the work that I do around the area of implementation. I say all my work starts with a puzzle, something where I think, why does my profession, me included by the way, why do we do that? No one's even talking about this. So the first one this morning was, why do we keep adding in the false hope that somehow the next small thing will be the thing that makes the difference? Why don't we have any tools, practices and resources for pruning? And if we don't prune, where are we going to be in 2030? Well, the next one I want to say that actually stems from a really positive area. Everyone wants to talk about impact. When do you reckon this started, by the way, and who was the cause of this? Turn to someone nearby and say, when do you reckon it started in Wales, and who was the cause of this? Go for it.
Oh, Joe. Impact. It was that stupid thing. That's when they first appeared, it all became impact. I'm blaming things. I'm right there, you got it from somewhere, came to you.
All right. All right, who, is everyone to say it started in 2020? Go earlier? 2018? Earlier? 2016? Earlier? 2014? Earlier? 2012? We're getting close, getting warmer? All right, so in that range, how early does someone want to make a claim here? 2008? Too early now? So somewhere between 2008 and 2012 it happened. Who was the cause of this? Just point to them. 3, 2, 1. All right, let me hear some names. Go for it. Who was the cause? Who is this Eston? Everyone's talking about Eston. Eston gets around everywhere. Eston's in this place, Eston's in this place. He's a very busy person. I haven't met Eston yet. So Eston maybe. Where does Eston learn it? Because Eston's not actually like a person, right? Eston, like lots and lots of people, different people. So where did Eston learn to start asking these questions? Because it didn't come up with it. Where did it come from? This just somewhere you've timed it in Wales, somewhere about 2008 to 2012. Or blame the Australians. Great. I actually think you're right. 2008 was the release of Visible Learning. A big book that a lot of people bought, never read, but made it look smart on their bookshelves. 2010 was Visible Learning for teachers, and then the sort of effect size visible learning stuff took off. By 2012, Education Endowment Foundation was founded. We started to get a lot of talk about impact. A lot of people don't know much about John Hattie other than John Hattie, visible learning, effect size. And the one thing they remember is he says, know thy impact. But then he doesn't tell you how to get it, how to work out what the impact is. Isn't that annoying? It's cheeky, isn't it? Know thy impact. Oh, but who am I to tell you how to work that out? He could do effect size meta-analysis work, which has obviously come under a lot of scrutiny over the last 5 years, particularly through one of your countrymen, the wonderful Dylan William. We'll say, oh, John, you can't come to any conclusions through meta-analysis like what you're doing. You've got to do best evidence synthesis. They have little wars down in Australia. We love it. The Dylan versus Hattie kind of punch on. It's pretty good. Don't they just write articles to each other? Who would you back in that fight, by the way? Dylan. Yeah. Every day. Right. Yeah. Dylan actually always starts it. John says, he's going at me again. And Dylan just lands in Australia, pulls out his PowerPoint, slide number 3. You can't do meta-analysis like this. It's wonderful. It's good fun to watch. But I just want to say, education doesn't always think the same. We kind of forget that. Like, you didn't think like this in 2008. And then someone said something, and it spread around the world, and particularly the English-speaking world moves pretty quickly between Wales, Scotland, Australia, New Zealand, and a touch of Western Canada. You notice this? Not England, of course. Couldn't learn from England. Don't worry, we don't learn from England either. But it's this thing. Everyone wants to talk about impact. Has anyone been asked a question about impact recently? What's your impact? What's your impact? People come into local authorities and they learn very quickly. They've come in from outside of education, and what they know is they sound really smart when they say, what's your impact on learner outcomes? What's your impact on learner outcomes? What's your impact on learner outcomes? Oh, good, you learned how to parrot back what everyone else says. Everyone's obsessed with outcomes. Impact, impact, impact. But no one really wants to talk about the other I, the one that I find much sexier. They don't want to get granular on implementation. It's so easy to be the person who says, what's your impact? What's your impact? What's your impact? Well, how do you get to impact? No, what's your impact? What's your impact? How do you get humans to get to impact? Oh, that implementation stuff's like really messy and hard and a bit like, let's just keep asking, but have you had an impact yet? I'm a big fan of impact. I want to get to impact. One of the 4 quadrants of my Clarify canvas is impact. But I'm a bit sick of people who aren't into the granular detail of implementation going on about impact when the pathway to impact they have no idea. Anyone else like that? Yeah. You see, we need to talk about implementation. I want to suggest in Wales, keep your commitment to impact, but maybe you need to have a much deeper discussion about implementation. A precise discussion about not that you want to change something. Everyone wants to change the same things as you. Not that everyone should have impact, of course. How do you get to impact? Oh, that's for other people to work out. So in this session, I want to explore the concept of implementation. I want to bring the other I of educational change back, and I want to suggest over the next little while, you've had enough talk about wanting to get to goals and impact, and you should spend the next year obsessing about implementation. And smoking out those who over and over again talk about impact and have nothing to say about the pathway to get there. They're parroting back something they stole from John Hattie in 2008. We've got to talk about implementation. And if you don't have a pathway on implementation, I kind of want you to stop talking about the impact question for a while. Because those of us who are rolling our sleeves up and trying to actually work out how to get human organisations to change what they do to eventually get to the outcome, we're obsessed about implementation. As the Education Endowment Foundation wrote in their terrific report on implementation, ultimately it doesn't matter how great an educational idea or intervention is on paper. What really matters is how it manifests itself in the day-to-day work of schools. Give me a nod if this makes sense to you. Now, if you're a head teacher, a team leader, a senior school leader, you know that many ideas that get released don't ever make it through the first couple of weeks or months of release. Some of you are getting sad at this. These are nice little evidence-based solutions walking in your school. They get taken down very early. Who's ever had something that basically didn't get to October? Right? I used to teach biology. The body is very good at picking up things that are non-self. As soon as it picks up that something is non-self, it starts to tag it. And once it starts to tag it and the rest of the immune system goes, oh, it's not from us, it starts a big punch on. It starts to develop additional, really targeted white blood cells that take that thing out. Has anyone had this response in the common room before? Something comes in, sounds a bit new, people are like looking at it. The few early skeptics or cynics start going, we're already doing this, or that won't work here, or we tried this before it came, before you came. And then there's a roll-on. And then some other people who are normally pretty open-minded, like, oh, is that where the group's going, is it? All right, get on board. People who sit around in meetings saying, yeah, but what's your impact? Who have no idea about implementation. It's time to roll your sleeves up and get closer to the field. Because what you get when you ask over and over again, have you done it yet? But you actually don't have any pathway to proper embedded implementation, you get what I call shallow implementation. There's lots of examples of this around the world. Think about how many schools put up something in about 2016 about growth mindset on their walls. Somewhere about 85% of the English-speaking world said, oh, and there's nothing wrong with Carol Dweck's work. I'll say that actual randomized control trials are starting to struggle to see whether or not it is actually an adaptable characteristic. And I'm not saying you shouldn't, it's a helpful frame. But what the majority of people went with, oh, we'll take a bit of that. actually building underlying capabilities of young people, actually getting them to make mastery progress, see that progress, look back, get into productive struggle. That's a bit hard, but let's stick on growth mindset on the wall. When the kids aren't being taught at the level that they need to be, they're not very well, we just go, how about a bit of that? Shallow implementation. Now, many of you do deep implementation of growth mindset. I saw some of those schools on Monday with my visits. But has anyone ever seen schools that like just put something on a wall? You ever seen like when John Hattie got famous here and people started doing learning intention success criteria, learning intention success criteria? Like it was this magic thing that, and people have been around for a while, are just like, oh, you mean like lesson clarity? Like just work out what you're trying to do and tell them what good looks like. But anyway, so, you know, people put it, and then you go into classrooms and they say, the learning intention, they'd stick it up and go, is that what you wanted? And then they would just teach the rest of the lesson the way they were planning to teach it. Shallow implementation. You see all sorts of this going on in schools, and as people start saying do more and more things and then hold you to account, what you'll see is more schools playing implementation theatre, which is put something up, put it in the plan, but nothing actually deeply changed. When you actually talk to the staff, they've got no idea what the fundamental changes are that they need. When you look at the contextualization, like basically it's cookie cutter. You see it turn up in exactly the same way across very, very different contexts. And when you see people using the materials, it's just like fast food cooking. They're just following the recipe, they haven't understood it, they don't really know what they're doing, but they heard someone said to do this, so they're doing it, and we haven't really had enough time to read about it at all yet, but we're just kind of doing it. So how do we get to depth? If you really want to be obsessed with getting to impact, you need to have a theory of implementation. If you really want your teams and school to move forward, you have to have a shared model of roughly what happens when schools implement something well. Not the final outcome, the process. If you're in a local authority, if you're in a whole region, then you need to have a theory about, just so you know, you don't implement something across a region, you implement something where every individual school needs to go on its own implementation journey, and if each of those schools go on an implementation journey successfully, then you've implemented it across the region. It's a bit silly when we say we're going to implement this across a local authority. Well, what it actually means is each of the schools within the local authority need to go on their own contextual journey to get a way to make this happen in their context. Otherwise, what they'll do is the equivalent of stick up the growth mindset posters. Does this count? Or when the new, more phonics-based approach to reading comes in, stick up the phonemes up on the wall. Does that count? No, we've got to build the teacher knowledge. We've got to change the programs. We've got to systematically do this differently. No, we put it on the wall. So what are you going to do, colleagues, across all levels of the system? Well, I've got 3 ideas in one process. Let's have a look. My view is that you should try to implement effectively as quickly as possible. This is crucial. This is a moral imperative. You should implement as quickly as naturally possible, but no faster. Just because you really want it to change in this political cycle doesn't mean it will. What's the possibility of this outcome or this area changing over what period of time? So 3 quick ideas. First idea is implementation in schools is always best understood as a phased journey. It's not an event. This comes out of the Education Endowment Foundation report around quality implementation. The further away you go from schools, you say, we've got the budget approval, we've rolled it out, we've got some staff on it. Is it implemented yet? I mean, we rolled it out on Thursday. Is it implemented on Monday? And what we're going to realise is that when you think about this, all of those schools need to go through a phased journey of implementation. Secondly, head teachers and school leaders often fall in the trap of saying, all right, we're waiting, it's in my SDP plan, and then what I need to do is launch it at a staff meeting, I'll get everyone's buy-in. Good luck with that, by the way. People tell me, because they read this in Cotter's 7-step change model from the 1990s in business, that what you do is you get some people, and then what you do is you get everyone's buy-in at the beginning. So what, you're going to get someone's cognitive and emotional commitment at the start of the journey after they've already been burnt with a bunch of wasted time over the last 3 or 5 years that hasn't resulted in any improvement, and then they're going to say, just because you said it really well, oh yeah, we'll give that a go. So we've got to think about, well, wait a second, what are these phased journey? What have we got to do at what stage to get real people on board? Second thing is, we've got to just focus on the human stuff. Who here struggles to just change some of the things in their own life? Like, who said they were going to have biscuits today and now too deep? And you're actually just like literally nudge the person next to you, "You going to have that? You all right? You going to have that?" And you look down, you're like, "Oh, why do I wear black today? I've got crumbs, didn't I?" And literally this morning, like, "I'm going to be good today." Who's ever said, I'm going to leave my phone downstairs or away from my bedroom, because otherwise I look at it at night and I look at it in the morning, it's not good for me, it's not good for my sleep. I'm going to have no digital devices 45 minutes before bed. I know the evidence. Who's just like, "Oh, but I need an alarm clock, so I need it next to my phone." So, you know there are things called alarm clocks? And you just find yourself there again. You're like, "Oh, where did the 35 minutes go?" You say to your partner, "I'm going to bed early." You go, "Okay, fine." And then you hear them come in an hour later, you're like, "Oh, crap, put your phone down." Like, "I was going to go to bed early." Yes, she's back. And they're like, "I can still see the glow from your phone." Focus on the human factors. If you struggle to go to bed on time, not eat a biscuit, and have a walk like me, not a run, Claire, a walk. That's what you saw me doing yesterday. Jeez. Then you need to understand that when you ask at a local authority level or a regional level that something is implemented, you're asking hundreds, if not thousands of adults to do something on a consistent basis different to what they're currently doing. And those adults are so flat out and exhausted, they struggle to not eat a biscuit, go to bed on time, and have a walk. And you say to them, "Can you just, you know how you've been teaching numeracy for the last 15 years and now you've got real automaticity on that approach and you're basically in autopilot and it helps you get through from 9:30 to 10:30 in the morning? Could you stop doing that? Could you reprogram all of that? Could you embed 4 purposes in that work? And could you make sure that you, for the first time in the last 30 years in our local authority, ensure that those from more disadvantaged backgrounds catch up to the rest?" That's what you're asking them to do. You should ask them to do it. It's a moral imperative that we start to work out in 2023 how to teach 70-year-olds mathematics. We really should work that out. But you know, if you don't understand that human factors of implementation is actually a huge amount of learning and unlearning, and the unlearning's the worst bit. Because as soon as they get busy, they go back to the way they used to do things. You say, "Oh, we need to lift reading and mathematics in these primary schools this year." "Oh yeah, well, I would like to do that too." Okay, so who are the adults who have to do the learning in that? Well, as you'll know, the same teachers teach reading and teach mathematics. Normally, they do both of those things before lunch, while the kids' brains are still attached to their heads. So then you say that teacher comes in, settles in, gets going. She now has to be out of autopilot doing something that's hard and deliberately different for 45 minutes. Then, in a transition, after a quick break that she has at her desk, go and now do something different to what she normally does in mathematics. What's the likelihood that that's going to be pulled off Monday through Friday? What about Monday through Friday when she's also had to cover half of someone else's class? What about not week 1, 2, 3, and 4, what about 6, 7, 8? Is the term still going yet? That's also week 9. Has anyone ever stuck to something an adult changed for a small period of time and then it all went back to the way it was before? Yeah. It's about now, actually. All your commitments in August, remember that? So what do I say? We've got to focus on the human factors of this. And if you're working across multiple schools, school improvement partner, as local authority, as a regional person, as a national policy people, whatever, you have a few, the best way to understand implementation is it's not like rock throwing problems, it's like bird moving problems. Rock throwing is what I can do is I can make a target, sounds very bold, we're going to move or close the gap on reading between this and this between now and 2026. It feels so nice when you said it. And then what we say is we make a plan, we set out all the milestones. Well, if that's how far away that is, what we'll do is just allocate over 3 years. We've got 9 terms. And so basically we've got to close the gap. So we'll divide that gap by 9. And every term we'll get 1/9 closer to closing the gap. You ever had this kind of... And it's a rock throwing problem. You pick it up and all we can do is at the beginning we can work out exactly how hard I have to throw it, the trajectory it needs to go, and it's going to hit that. That's what policy people do. It's lovely. I wish educational change that worked that way. But unfortunately, educational change is not rock throwing problems, it's much more like bird moving problems. Do you get birds in your classroom here? Yeah? No. We get pigeons. What's your best strategy for getting a bird from one side of the room to another? Just turn to someone nearby and tell them, go. All right, nice loud voice. Did anyone have some nice ways to get birds to move from one side of the room to another? I saw people go like this. I don't know why you have to move it. Like, why you have to do this? Like, your arms are like this. But it's like, yeah. Anyone doing this? Yeah, what else did you do? Give it food. Yeah, okay. Anyone try a bit of food? So, and then you get the deputy principal, and what does she do when she comes in? Screams. Scares it, puts the fan on. What else? Anyone throw something over the top of it and drag it out? Yeah, you went straight there as well. Kill the bird, tie it to a rock and throw the rock. There's some forms of policy like that. It was called England in about 2004. And by that, you've got these problems where you're all about agency here. Right? Oh, I want about agency, student voice, I want empowered, capable students. And it's like, then what do we do about all the adults that we need to get them to change? So we either treat them like this. We say, can you just do this now, 9:30, teach like this, in this way, stop thinking so much, do what you're told. Or we say, we want teacher autonomy and agency, maybe not autonomy, but at least agency and collective agency. It's just like, yeah, but it's going a bit slow. We tried to put some food, but no one was hungry. One or two keen ones ran straight across, and the rest of them went, what are you doing? And we start going, well, now we're going to push a little bit more. Who finds this difficult? And we're only talking about the staff, let alone the parents and the caregivers. What about the fact that you can't learn on behalf of your students? Does anyone else find that annoying? Someone should tell you that before you join teaching school, don't you think? It's like, you know how you're really good at this school stuff and now you're going back to it? Not everyone thinks about it the way you think about it. It's like, I'll be a great teacher. Yeah, but they've got to do the learning. It sucks. Don't you wish there was like a one-to-one relationship between effort of teaching and learning outcome? Imagine how much we'd kill. We'd just slay every day. We'd be just like, we turn up, we teach, they learn. We teach, they learn. We teach, they learn. Oh, this is killing it. We teach, they learn. Instead, we teach and woohoo! Because most teaching doesn't result in learning. Learning is a change in long-term memory. Learning requires attention, engagement, not engagement like, whoa, this is so fun, but like, I'm actually using my working memory to process what's coming in, connecting that towards other things, and then later on actually recalling that, otherwise I just lose it. It's such a complex process. When you ask for a learner outcome to be changed, you're asking for thousands of people to do different things on a consistent basis and do that for multiple years such that it adds up to a long-term change in literacy, numeracy, or achievement. Thousands of people, including the ones that influence the outcomes the most, don't work for you. They're the students, their peers, and their families. I didn't say you were not the most important in-school variable, but not many studies would say that you even account for 50% of the variance in literacy or numeracy. Do we take implementation seriously, or are we just parroting John Hattie because it makes us sound smart? By the way, I love John. He's just like the best guy, and he would agree with all of this kind of thinking, and he's become obsessed with implementation. Lastly, when you come up with evidence-based ideas, and I hope you are basing your ideas on evidence, when you base your ideas on evidence, that evidence won't just work in every school context. Now, I've got to be careful here, because sometimes you've got those who are just like, schools are so different, what works here will never work anywhere else. No, I'm not sure about that, because you've still got humans, and all humans learn the same. And actually, once you understand that the human brain, hasn't really changed for at least 100,000 years, you start to go, okay, there's a lot of consistencies about how humans learn. There's a lot of consistency about what good teaching looks like, but there's different. And somehow, when you're working on implementation, you've got to find a way to give people enough wriggle room to flex and make it work for their context, without ruining the active ingredients of the evidence. Which, if you ruin the active ingredients, it's called a terminal mutation. But you have to adaptively integrate it. Wouldn't it be nice if the local authority could just send EAS over to your school and they say, hey, we've got the new approach to teaching writing for 15-year-olds. You go, just plug it in the back. They have a little USB, it plugs in, and the whole operating system of the school shifts. All the teachers upgrade their knowledge and skills. They're all right, and it's just ready to roll. Wouldn't that be nice? But of course, we've got to do local learning. We've got to check and learn. We've got to adjust, and we've got to build the organisational capacity. We need to engage in adaptive, iterative, disciplined approach to bring our change ideas based on the evidence to have any likelihood of them actually working in our local context. 3 core ideas about implementation. Turn to the person next to you and say, which one of these do you find most helpful? Which one of these do you find most helpful when thinking about implementation? Go for it. All right, let me bring you back. Let's get practical. So in all areas like this, one of the things that puzzles me is why for 10 years we've obsessed with saying, what's your impact, without asking really clear questions about, well, what have we learned about how to get local schools move towards impact? And remember, if you have a short-term impact in schools that then drop away, you may as well have done nothing. American kind of got caught in these cycles of quickly bumping up results for a couple of weeks or months. And by the way, you can get students to have short-term performance without long-term learning. They bump it up, but actually the problem is if even teaching just bumps up for a few weeks or whatever to see something go up on a data wall, artificially inflates something for a period of time, but that teaching isn't sustained and consistent across not just in the primary school but then into the cluster secondary school, well, all of those early gains just tend towards nothing. You'll see this often with pull-out interventions, where you'll do some pull-out intervention with a kid in reading, they go out, you might get them back at grade level in reading, they come back in, and then within 2 to 3 years, they're back at where their disadvantage level would have predicted. Has anyone seen this heartbreaking reality? And so the reality is you actually need to have school-wide change in the area you're working on. And that change needs to not just be for 6 months or 1 year, it needs to be basically irreversible until the evidence shifts. What normally happens is it lasts for a little while until we've got 20 to 30% of changeover. Oh, and then actually the reception teachers have totally changed over. It's 2 years after we did that training, and now no one is using that early years literacy approach in reception, even though we kind of did it a little while ago. Has anyone seen that kind of thing happen before? So what do? If I was a school leader, or if I was a local authority leader or regional leader thinking about what this looks like, well, I'm going to suggest you need a shared model of implementation. And the more explicit you can be about this, and the clearer that you'll say, is we don't start something unless we're going to take it through to being an embedded part of what we do. We don't start something unless we've got a commitment to try to take it through towards an embedded part of what we do. Is anyone else surprised that under your headship now you have to solve numeracy and literacy? Is anyone else surprised? But I'm fascinated that the heads and their teams of the 2020s, you would never have predicted in the early 80s, the heads and the teams, the head teachers and their teams of 2023 in the future, they would be asking questions like, oh, how do we teach them equivalence of fractions? How do we get a year 8 child to write in a full sentence? Does anyone else struggle with getting a kid to use a full stop and a capital letter? So do all we. In 2023. We haven't worked out how to do this yet. These must be really complex problems. This is why I always get so frustrated when the new head teacher comes in and they say, okay, you need to fix this now. You're like, well, what have the other 20 have been doing? What the heck? Like, why is it on me suddenly? It's like me. It's like, well, you're the sucker in the seat now. Now we're going to set unrealistic expectations on you. And when we burn you out, we're going to do it to the next one too. Why are you still working out a way to teach 5 to 12-year-old the key ideas in number? People just played around with it. They didn't get an embedded approach that lasts. So here's what I call it. I call it a life cycle model, an implementation life cycle. You need to bring these ideas to life in your context. I've got it mapped out in a A different grid form for you. You don't have this, but you'll have my slides later on if you're nice to Deb. If you're not nice to Deb, she won't send you the slides. Suddenly Deb's getting lunch brought to her. People are bringing a barista coffee. This is good. So let's have a think about good implementation at the school level. Please only think about it at school level. If you're at a local authority or regional level, you should think that every school I work in has to go through this process. Don't please say, oh, well, my local authority or my region will do an explore, will do an experiment. You need the schools to go on their own implementation journey. All right, so it starts off with explore. Explore should be a very low level of scaled implementation. When I was in Helen's school, I think you told me you had 197-ish students-ish, yep. Yesterday I was at a secondary school. Deb, help me pronounce it. Yeah, what she said. I just keep looking at your words and like, where are the vowels? Like, can I buy a vowel? Like, I'm struggling. Anyway, beautiful. So that was schools on the way to 800, I think, right? And so the scale of implementation is going to look very different. If I'm in a school of 200, maybe I'm starting with 5. Maybe if I'm at a school of 800, maybe I'm starting with 15 to 20. So there's no hard and fast rules. But here's what you need to do. Firstly, you start really small. You never take it to all. You explore for a period of time. After you explore, you're allowed to move to experiment. Experimenting is where we work at a smaller scale than the full school. This is the basic discipline of anyone working in human systems that wants to make an improvement. We never say, I'm passionate about it, we need to solve the problem, so we'll roll it out to all. I'm passionate about it, we need to solve the problem, so we need to experiment in a disciplined way. Sometimes, if it's a really, really important question, we'll experiment very quickly. I don't want to get into the vaccination debate, but what did we do? We said, we're still going to test it on a few, but we're going to do those trials quicker than ever before. But we're not going to miss those trials. But it really, really matters. We should just roll it out to everyone. We've got to experiment because the first rule is technically do no harm. In education, you need to understand that some of the things you do can make things worse. Some of the things you can do can make things worse. Sometimes those changes take quite a while to add up to. I'll tell you something that we're struggling with in Australia now. We think we've potentially used such a big focus on well-being. We've given so many kids such a well-being literacy, such a mental health literacy, that no kid is ever just a bit sad or a bit worried about a test now. So we primed the language in this beautiful attempt to reduce stigma. We don't have any stigma about that. Problem is we've gone so far the other way that students are so primed that when they ruminate and reflect, they go, I must be there. I must be going through that. And that which should be, yeah, you're a little bit worried about a test, that should be normal, becomes, I've got anxiety. That which is, you know what, I haven't slept all that much, I'm a bit overworked, I'm a bit overtired, I'm depressed, as opposed to, I'm a bit flat, probably should get 9 hours sleep tonight, probably should eat some berries, probably should go for a walk, probably should, well for us, get off the booze. Right? All these things. So sometimes you don't even see this, well-intended things turn up quite a long way down, because we've gone really big implementation on things that we didn't do testing on that. And then we're like, oh, wait a second, what might we have caused? And if you're in a pastoral care role in a high school, you'll know all about this. So sometimes it takes a while, but in the early days, explore, experiment, and once you can get it to work with a group okay, then you're allowed to start on the expand journey. The expand journey is we're trying to take it to the full extent of staff and adults that we want to actually shift in this area. And what we normally then do is go, oh yeah, it's working pretty good, most people are doing it. Next year we'll put something new in our school development plan. Where actually, you're not allowed to move on until it's in embedding. Embedding means that we've got instructional habits. Embedding means that we've got organisational routines. Embedding now that there's meetings with a rough regular schedule and ritual there. Embedding means that someone's monitoring that if this drops off, we'll know about it. Embedding means that new staff get a boot camp on this approach so that each year we're not losing the voltage and power of this approach every time we lose 20% of our staff turnover. We've got to get to embedding. So when you start off a new year, one of the things I would be adding, remember how no one asked me for the advice, so I give it? Not only would I have a pruning section at the front of your school development planning work, I would also have a section that says what's the work you're doing and what's the level of maturity it's up to. Please don't move to the, oh, we did literacy last year, so we're doing numeracy this year. Where'd you get up to in literacy? A couple of the groups working okay, maybe around this red. Okay, so why are you moving to numeracy? Oh, because in our original 3-year plan we said we do numeracy this year. But you're only in the early expanding phase. Yeah, I know, we didn't get as far as we want, but we've got to move to the next one now. No, please don't move until it's embedded, because otherwise all the first work will go to nothing. You've got to embed this approach so people can't not teach in that way anymore before you move to the next one. Embedding is the overlooked phase of implementation. In fact, embedding is where the majority of the impact will probably come from, because the majority of the impact is the fact that people will do this from now on. All right. I want you to have a think about some of the areas that you're working on. In a moment, we'll have a look. As you break these down, exploring is often about some early phase. I wonder if we're going to do this. Is anyone exploring anything at the moment? Exploring is really important for the head teacher to say, we're an explorer. And I often say, we're an explorer. Don't take us so seriously. We're just an explorer. Often this will involve the school leadership team, maybe talking to their school improvement partner and say, hey, you know, we got that thing out of the self-evaluation, or you know that thing out of Eston, you know, one of the 8 things we have to do in the next 8 months. Hey, we're going to get some solutions to this. So let's go and explore some potential ways to solve it. But let's not quickly jump to a solution. Let's hold our ideas really loosely. So I remember talking to one school that was looking into some approaches, just the really simple Harvard visible thinking stuff. They'd heard that was good. Their literacy and other results were really going well, and they wanted to sort of do some metacognitive and thinking work. They spent about 3 months turning up to webinars, reading some stuff, discussing, and at the end of that time they decided, actually, we're not going to do that. It's very hard for school improvement teams to do that, because they think, oh, I've spent 3 months. Yeah, but there's only 3 of you spending a couple of hours on it. We haven't got to the 15 staff yet. And people often just move from the explore straight into the experiment. I already decided. No, hold your ideas lightly. It should be really normal after a little bit of time in the explore phase to say, yeah, no, that's not the right solution for us. Not going to do it. An Australian expression that you should learn is, yeah, nah. Have you ever heard of it? Just means that. Yeah, nah. Oh, it sounds a bit Welsh, doesn't it? Yeah, nah. All right. And you're looking at it, you say, what they said to me is, we looked at it, we thought it was going to be an easy, quick win. When we actually looked at it and looked at some schools who'd done it before, we realised it was more like an 18-month journey to do it well. And then when we backed that in against all the other things we were doing, we said, no, we're not going to go ahead on that. Most people say, oh, we already sent that person to the course and we bought some books. Yeah, good. You have to explore. And often you want to shut it down. You're checking your school readiness. Is our school ready to do this? Oh, another school down the road in our cluster, it worked really well. Yeah, but you're not like them. You're different. Has your school got the readiness to do this? Do you have the underlying capacities to do this? Yeah, what would have to be true for this project to be our right next move? You ask that question really hard. Explore. Well, once you've explored, you want to experiment. And by the way, you can adjust this model, but for me, it's about experiment. And it says, we don't know how to make this work in our context, even though we think it's got some good evidence and it's working okay in some similar other schools to us. So we've got to experiment. An experiment is all about implementing small to learn fast. You purposely say, we're going to go small. So rather than starting a restaurant, which is what people think, I want to start a restaurant, so I've just got to back myself in. I've got to get a new venue here in Newport. I'm going to spend, £50,000 doing it up. I'm going to make some big calls. I'm going to back myself in and hope this works. But what I'd really recommend is just starting with the really simple idea, like an incubation of a restaurant. Do a food truck. If you get the location wrong on the food truck, how much will it cost you to move? A little bit of petrol? Get the location wrong on your restaurant, it's all over. So often you build the restaurant when you should build the incubation of the restaurant. Maybe a dinner party or a pop-up store, might be even smaller experiments of that future idea. So people often start at full school, but normally I always say shrink it down. If you want to go full school in the end, why don't you get to a small group of volunteers or one core team? The right response from some is to say, well, if I work with a team who's really committed and keen, if it works with them, it doesn't mean it's going to work with everyone else. I say, yeah, of course. But if it doesn't work with them, it's got no chance of working with everyone else. So of course your first experiment should be with your high skill, high will people. Because then in this little natural experiment you're running, you're trying to say, if this fails, I don't want it to fail because the people didn't have the skills or capability. I want it to fail because the idea isn't yet a good idea for this context. And so we work in these ways. And bit by bit, our real goal is to build social proof. That we never want to move to the expanding phase of implementation until we have some examples within our current context that this can be helpful and it's working. If you think about all the different change approaches the head teachers use when they get up in front of their common room to win over the skeptics and the cynics. So I'm going to make a compelling case for change based on our weaknesses. Look at our self-evaluation. Look at what has been told, we've got to fix this. That's all right. Outline the external research evidence. John Hattie says this. Is that really convincing in your staff room? Provide case studies of where similar approaches have worked in different schools. They'll say, yeah, but we're different. Or demonstrate that the approach has already had a positive benefit for learners and teachers in your current school. The experiment isn't over until you actually get a small bump with people saying, yeah, it's working all right. Once you've got a couple of people working, now you can really take off. It's no longer just abstract. You've got real things to point to, concrete things to point to, and champions you can use. And you're trying to build a bit of a movement, not a mandate. You're trying to get the training and the champions and the work moving forward. And after 6 to 8, maybe 18 months in a large secondary school, you might find yourself in embedding, where you've won 60, 70%, you're moving forward and you're trying to make sure that we're not going to lose ground and we're going to sustain this work. I'm a big believer in focusing on maintenance, that much of the benefit we can get is by actually taking the changes we tested and finding a way for them to sustain over time. All right. Well, hey, what I'd love you to do is have a look at the other way I've written out this framework in your toolkit. This is just a starting point, and I'm happy through Deb, if you provide her with some additional dessert with lunch or anything else that she wants, to provide some digital copies of these tools for those who want. Because what I'd actually like you to do is to take the 4E model here, and you'll see I've got some draft potential actions that could be taken by schools at that phase. The idea being, of course, that school level leaders say to each other, look, no matter how much power we have here, we have to be disciplined by this process. We go from explore to experiment to expand to embed. And there's sorts of work that we should do at each level, and we should be very careful about jumping over that work. So whether or not you want to use the potential actions, or if you flip over the questions that sit at each phase, you could imagine either as a head teacher or a school improvement partner coaching a school team, you could say, well, what are we working on now? Which phase are we in? If that's what phase we're in, what are the actions we want to take? And you could use those coaching questions as a way of unpacking what are the next most important pieces of work. All right. Well, let me give you an integrative task to have a look at these. I want you to focus on one, or maybe two, but let's focus on one to begin with. One really important area you're working on in teaching, learning, curriculum, or assessment. Two, I want you to think about what phase is that project up to. Go and have a look at the actions and think about what are the sorts of actions that might need to be prioritized now, and then consider one of the questions in the question box that you really might push your school improvement team to have a higher level conversation. Everyone understood? 15 minutes, go for it. All right, I'll repeat your answers. I'm looking for a couple of ideas here with regards to what do you find helpful about having a 4-phase model of implementation. I want to say it's just a model. The model's not right, but it might be helpful. Okay, it's not right, but it might be helpful. What would it be like if you implemented a model for implementation so that everyone in your leadership team can understand what do we actually have to take things through to bother doing it? It would also mean that what's the point of starting something unless you've at least got an intent to take it through to embedded? Doesn't mean you have to. Remember, at the end of explore, you can choose to dump it. At the end of experiment, if you can't get it to work, you should dump it. Early expand, if it starts to really struggle with everyone else beyond the volunteers, maybe you don't have a good answer yet. But what would be useful? Can I get a couple of hands up? What do you find useful about this model? Who could kick us off? Great. Yeah, nice loud voice.
It's the dialogue and the questions that comes out of the dialogue.
Great.
So the plan is great. It's the steps that you would take. But what's more powerful is the dialogue with the team.
Brilliant. Round of applause. You deserve it. By the way, if it wasn't a good response, we'd give you nothing. So the dialogue, and I also say it's empowering, because if I'm a new teacher, I'm a new member of your team, this is stuck up on the wall, and I don't have to say, oh, I'm wondering whether we're moving a bit too quickly, and oh, I'm not going to say anything. Hey, I'm just wondering, so did you say we're moving out of the experiment phase? Have we done this one yet? Or we go to the question. The question says, do we have a functioning social proof point in our context? And I can ask that. I'm not having a direct challenge to the head teacher. I'm just asking the question that the protocol or the tool lets me ask. And actually, bit by bit, we all start saying, okay, so we all follow the rules here. And the rules are, what do we know about effective implementation? And we're having honest conversations about that. All right, one here.
Can we just talk about the model?
Can you hear okay? You have to yell, yeah.
The implementation cycle, that model's really helpful because, like you were saying, with the context, that might change over time.
Yes.
So actually having the dialogue around, well, we perhaps were expanding, but because of the changing staff, or we moved around, then we may sort of go back to experimentation.
Good.
Phase. So the fact that it isn't a variable or
Great, thank you. Round of applause. And there's a flexibility, it's not lockstep. And yeah, if you do get change or something totally drops off, you go, okay, we're going to return to that level. We're going to get that working and move through. Two other comments. Who else can help us out? Go for it. Nice loud voice.
I was just going to say the fact that it's okay to ditch something as well, and not keep plowing on with something just because you maybe started the process. That this model kind of gives you that freedom, I suppose. Kind of say, we'll try it, we'll have a go, but for everyone as well in the team, kind of feel that it's okay.
Good.
Things don't go as kind of expected them to go.
Good one. Round of applause. Exactly right. And it's going to be crucial for the head teacher to model that and for the school improvement partner to create space for that. Now, there are hard conversations. Is it not going to work here, or is it not working yet? Do we move through another iteration, or do we decide to dump it? But the key thing here, and this brings up that sunk cost fallacy, you need to be okay, at least with the potential, to come to an answer which is, this isn't going to work here. And that you've spent the time and energy to learn it won't work here. But here's the thing, you're only at an implementation group of 3 people, 5 people. You haven't got to 15 people, 30 people. Think about all the time saving and energy saving if you can kill it at 5 people, not 30 people. If you can kill it for a group of people who said, look, I always went into this to learn on behalf of the rest of the school. But it's really important that people don't say, well, I've spent 10 hours on this. We've got to get it to the rest of the 30 to justify my 10 hours. You spent 10 hours, and now we're going to get 30 people to spend 100 hours each over the next 2 years implementing this. So we want to justify your 10 hours with 3,000 hours of professional time. That's what happens all the time in schools. Oh yeah, I bet it will work out later on. Yeah, because if it doesn't work with these people, I bet it's going to work out really well at scale. Good call. All right, one more comment. Yeah, Claire.
We're taking the human factors as you talk through
Okay.
the implementation process and the importance of hearts and minds when you implement anything new. And the fact that it is phased. I like the idea of the playfulness and the readiness in exploring, and we were talking around pushing at open doors to have that social proof, you go to one that.
Nice, that's a good phrase. Great, so that the real focus on the human side, the hearts and minds, otherwise nothing's going to move. I love your phrase there. Explore is all about playfulness and readiness. I'll steal that from you and sometimes reference you, Claire. But that idea of like, hey, and so what I loved about that is Jo can say, and I know she already would do this, but say, hey, we're an explorer on this one, so hold our ideas lightly, hey? Hey, can we bring a bit of playfulness? You might even move to another space for it. Like you've got lovely spaces in a lot of your primary schools. Just go like, we're in explore phase. It's like, why are we sitting in the sand pit for a reception? Because I want everyone to know we're in the sand pit right now. We're just playing with stuff. Don't take your castle so seriously. Okay? And someone's like, what is that wet patch? Oh yeah, sorry about that. Shouldn't have sat there. And then in experiment, we move into chief scientist, which is we're working on hard things, so things will go wrong, not because we're not bright, not because we haven't thought it through, but because the world's complex. And it's so weird for me because educators always tell me, oh, it's so complex, it's so human, it's so messy. And then I say, yeah, so you probably won't get it right the first time. Oh, you think? I was really hoping it would go perfectly. So you tell policymakers all the time, it's complex and it's messy, and then you expect to get A+ every time you try something new with humans. See how that's totally inconsistent? I've actually got to say, when you do hard things in complex places, I wonder what your failure rate should be. It should be pretty high. Now, failure in the sense of it's just that iteration. They needed more time, they needed more adjustment, they needed less choice, they needed more choice, they needed this, they needed that, and you learn all those things in the chief experimentation mode. And then when you get to expand mode, you can play all your normal change management stuff that I know you're great at. Running training, communicating the message, but you're doing that with the power that you've actually understood what it's going to probably take to do it here. And the skeptics and the cynics fade away because when they say, that won't work here, you say, well, talk to year 3. Go and see them. Actually, I'll take your class for 2 hours. It's been a while since I've gone to the class. Actually, I've been looking for an opportunity. This is great. I'll take your class this afternoon. You go sit in with their PLC group. Just sit in. You tell me what you're seeing. Or you get people to, and I often just think in the expand phase, we're very careful about who we put in front of people. So don't get the super keen 26-year-old who works 60 hours a week, using all the fancy technology, and everyone looks and goes, if that's what you want, I'm not doing it. Get the person who's like, oh, well, I'm the last person that thought I was going to be in this, but, you know, she asked if I'd be in the group, so I'll give it a go, and, you know, it's actually going all right. So that's someone with standing in the common room. So you play the social game. Who would I put there that would actually win the people I most want? Who do I put in front? How do I make that move? And I'm thinking carefully about that work. I might invite someone who's a positive disagreeer. Adam Grant, the organisational psychologist, calls a positive disagreeer, which is someone, they're not cynics, which is the people who we say in Australia, the cynics pee in the pool they're swimming in. You know, they're planning to stay in this culture, but they're going to just ruin it on the way out. But I also learned that cynics are often the disappointed optimists. Or the disappointed idealists is probably the better way to say that. A lot of those people have bigger aspirations for what's going to happen in the system, and they just get burnt out, and they go from skepticism to cynicism. So anyway, the way to win over is to think about some positive disagreeers, get them into maybe the second experiment group, let them sit it, do it, and then try to use their story, which will sometimes be a lot less enthusiastic, and we'll have a bit, I'm not too sure about this, but it's been all right, or it hasn't been as bad as I thought it would be. And you're like, oh, that's the quote I want. Not, this is amazing, I've never taught like this in my life, my kid, no, just be quiet. It's just too much. Because you're sitting there with a kid who's waking you up at night, and I don't care whether that's a 1-year-old at home or you've got a 21-year-old at home keeping you up, right? You've got a sick parent you go and visit a couple of times a week, you've got a renovation that's not going very well, you've got stuff going on, and you need people who've got stuff going on who stand up and go, yeah, it's all right, better than it was. Oh, what a killer line, right? That's how you get buy-in. Okay, you've got to play the cards. I hate to say it, many school leaders just play the worst relational human cards I see. They go, I don't know where I'm getting the pushback. It's like, well, you just didn't even do the first 2 phases. And I have to sometimes say, look, I'm going to say this. I love you, but you deserve what you're getting. Let's go back and unpick it. And every phase you jump over, you will have to unpick. You can do the phases quicker, but you'll have to unpick. I should say there's a spare phase. Some people say, what happens if if it's working well, it's been around for a while, we don't have to go right back to the bottom. And I say, sometimes you move into an evolve, which is it's been around for a while, it needs a little freshen up. It's not going right back to the beginning, but that evolve gets you back in some ways to exploring and rethinking what you've got. All right, give me a vote with your fingers. Who reckons this could be all right? Who would like to see across your cluster model, like I say local authority, across your clusters, you could bring this and say, hey, I'm wondering when we do work together, why don't we choose an area we're working on, why don't we go through the 4E, we all have to do our own 4E journey. The cluster doesn't do a 4E journey. Each individual school working on that goes through the 4E journey. And now what we can actually do is you could start to lay out your individual work. You could share it clusters. Hey, what are all the main things you're doing this year, and where would you put them in the 4E? Oh, we're doing this on professional learning. We're doing this on formative assessment. We're doing this on reading comprehension. Ah, that's interesting. Here's what we're doing. Here's what it's up to for us. And you can start to talk a little bit about that. Or if you did a new project, can you just make sure you're working up together and you're actually saying, well, where are you up to in the model? What do you need next? Last thing I want you to do. I'd love you, please, to pull out this last bit, and I want you to think about your school development plan. I want you to think about your school development plan for the year, and if you're EAS, think about your business plan for the year. If you're a local authority, think about the work that you're leading across the system in your portfolio. And I want you to put the different things you're working on at the different levels of the 4E model. So what are the things you're working on this year that is an explore? What are the things you're working on this year that are technically an experiment? You didn't call it experiment, but it's a smaller scale, you're incubating it, you're testing it. What are the things you're working on that are in expand? What are the things you're working on that are in embedding? And sometimes the embedding, by the way, aren't even in your plan, but you know that you need to put energy and effort for it. All right, take 5 minutes, please write on it, don't just talk about it. Try to get to a shared understanding of all the things you're doing and where they sit. Go for it. Move to lunch. How's it going? Good conversation? You could easily print a large one, A3, up on the wall, have this conversation with the rest of your leadership team. It helps you have a different state of being, helps other staff. Sometimes you say, hey, just so you know, we're in an explore phase for this. We're looking for 2 or 3 people to join the explore team to see whether or not we really understand the problem to be solved and what's going on. Anyone want to join the explore team? We're moving now, we've got a good answer to that. We're actually moving to experiment. We're not asking everyone to do it. People go, oh, this is so orderly. Yeah. We'd never ask you to do something unless we feel like we've got a good answer to what can work here. And then you either ask for volunteers, or normally you ask some key people and you open it to volunteers. And you can do that so that people can't say later on, oh, well, I wasn't part of that. Well, no, actually, I've got it here in the email here. I said, would anyone like to be part of the... And of course they didn't. But you have to have that sense of going to some, opening it to all. That might be important in your culture. In others, once you've done this for a while, every now and again we say, someone's got to take one for the team. Do you ever say that? And, okay. So we say, all right, year 4 is going to take one for the team here. But then sometimes people think, it's always year 4. No. Then the next one we say, actually, we're going to ask these people to have a go at it. Or these 2. So you're purposely thinking about, if you can, now you might say, I've only got 3. Okay, just go with them. They'll quite enjoy it. It'll keep them energized. But sometimes you say, okay, no, they've had a go. We're looking for a different team to do that discipline, problem-solving, experimentation phase. And you build a whole culture around it, a norm around it. And here's what it gives you. It gives you legitimacy. Because when you say, we're going to actually expand this, you have legitimacy because we've got a problem to be solved, we've worked out how to do it here, and we move forward. Last thing I just want to say is that sometimes the system will give you something to do that you didn't choose to do. Has anyone ever had that before? So what do we do? Well, one of the most important things I always say in the front end is to say, where might there be potential in this reform to do the things we already wanted to do? So no one asked for a once in 20-year curriculum change at the end of a once in 100-year pandemic. But that's what we've got in New South Wales. So now we're saying, all right, there's one mode you could lead this, and that is we have to. Whoever uses this strategy. It's the best strategy to get your staff on board early on, because basically you say, I stand with you the way we view this bullcrap. And it's really easy because you can stand with them and go, yeah, this sucks. We've got to do this. And it's a really good short-term strategy to get people aligned on your staff. Like, yeah, even my head teacher thinks this is a load of... So this is Australian. And we say, all right, we just got to get this thing on. We've got to get the curriculum reform on the list. Just get it. We just got to roll this out. We've got to roll this out and say, this is going to be a 2 to 3 year journey. You really think you're going to lead organisational change around this by doing we have to? So we do a lot of work when we get handed things down on the how do we get ourselves to we get to. And we think about it, we say, well, I don't want to do it. I know, but it's coming. So what do you want to do with this? Because they're going to smell it on you. Local authority says we have to... The inspectorate said this, so we have to... Good luck motivating humans with that. Works really well early on because they're like, oh, she's part of our side. It's like, oh, we've still got to do the work. So what I ask school leadership teams to do is to go away and to say, what does this give us an opportunity to do that we already wanted to do? And so I'm saying to teams, a curriculum reform gives us a chance to really up the level of professional collaboration that we've been wanting for a long time. A lot of us have had things like collective efficacy and teamwork in our plans for a while. Some of us wanted to flush out some of the horrible programs in secondary schools that have been in and around since the mid-90s, despite the fact we've had curriculum changes before, which is amazing how they can last. We want to flush that. Okay, that gives us a chance to do that. Hey, we wanted to do some work on assessment. We want to do some... So we didn't ask for this, but what are the things we get to do? And I would say in all the things that you lead, everything still has to go through a 4E model. Even if a system gives it to you, your explore phase is, all right, so what are we going to do with this thing we have to do? If that's the thing we have to do, what problem could it solve here? Because the system may not have worked out that it even solves a problem. But if you're going to have to do it and you're going to get inspected on it, please don't just roll it out. Think, oh, how cheekily could we use this as a way to do some of the stuff we already wanted to do? Does this make any sense? And so some of the work you have to do early on, you still have to do a 4E model, even if someone else puts something on you. So the exploring is about, do we know what this thing we're being forced to do might actually be positive for us? How could we make it into something that's good? Experiment. How do we take this thing that's been handed down from above, and none of the people who hand it down even have been in a classroom for a long time? So we've got to experiment, work out how do we not break the policy or initiative, but how do we make it work here? Once we've got it to work here, then we move to expand and then embed. Does this make sense? And so I always ask, hey, which camp is the majority of your staff in now on this change? And you could say like curriculum for Wales or other big things. And then you've got to ask, which camp are you in as a team? And when you fall into that camp of like, oh, we have to just roll it out, particularly for something that's large and requires a lot of adult learning, you're just going to run out of fuel before you get through this phase journey. And so I often say that there's sometimes things you get given, you've got to do the hard work of getting beyond the we have to the we get to, and ask yourself, what does this give us an opportunity to do, even though we didn't ask it for it? And the schools that are leading good curriculum reform where I am, we've worked out what's our underlying reason why this is great for us, even though we probably wouldn't have done it this way. So things like, we really wanted to lift literacy outcomes. We can do this by upgrading our English syllabuses and our English curriculum. And so we don't have a literacy target area and then a curriculum reform area. We're doing the literacy via the curriculum reform. And you can come up with lots of different ways to do that work. Secondary schools, we really wanted to update this assessment. We've been working on formative assessment for a long time. Let's do that via the curriculum reform. Does this make sense for anyone? All right, if anyone did any decent work at your table in that session, give them a smile and a round of applause. Go for it. Could you peer check and just let me know just by raising your hand and pointing at anyone who didn't do the last task? They can go, okay. We have plenty of food, it looks like at the back, so I know you're all amazing at queuing. My suggestion is it's actually more helpful to, rather than having 70 people queue, to, because you're like, I'll just wait here, and then at 1:30 I'm restarting, you're like, I'm just waiting for the, it's actually helpful if people can hit it at multiple angles and do multiple rounds, okay? So rather than basically you'll have 4 lots of the same sandwiches, picking up, oh no, that's the same, this. So take a bit of agency. I might ask the EAS people out there to help us out. And it's often helpful just have some people passing out plates. And we're going to do this Australian mode, which is people are going to access at all angles, hit the table, take your first one, go, and then bounce back around. Does that sound okay? And then the goal is we're either going to have a fist fight or we're all going to get fed in 10 minutes. All right, see you at 1:45. Right. Well, let me do a shameless plug to begin and just say, hands up if you've been part of our Agile School Leadership cohorts before, just give us a wave. As you can see, we all choose the most intelligent, best looking people for our cohorts. Sorry we've overlooked you up until now, I don't know what's been happening. But these wonderful humans have worked with me from a distance. Some of them have been sort of really surprised that I have legs, because I normally just turn up, on their Zoom screens. And what we've been pioneering together is that actually, whilst professional learning like this, where sometimes you want to have dialogue across the country actually, or at least across local authorities. Really good to be together in the flesh. Actually, sometimes, particularly under the pressures of workload now, short, sharp, digitally delivered sessions that are around core content and a tool, a time to have that conversation with your colleagues and then apply. These wonderful humans have been demonstrating that. If you were interested, I think we've got a cohort coming up, so shameless plug, we'd love to have you. They are coming up in about November, so lots of time, and I'd say a couple of things. One, if you've been a school who's been involved, but you've got new staff members for leadership, or you're building mid-level leadership capacity, have a think about getting them on so we can teach them some of those core routines and tools. For others, especially those visiting South East Wales, we'd love to have you as well. So make sure you reach into the centre and just grab one of those brochures. I'll be zooming in from New South Wales to join you, and it'd be wonderful to have you as part of that program. We've got lots of lovely case studies and examples of great work happening, and yesterday we were fortunate to meet with some of those alumni and get together and hear that work. All right, well, let's move into the next piece of the work. We'll touch on the Agile leadership stuff right at the end, but I'm aware we've got lots of colleagues here who are fairly deep into it, so I want to add some more new and valuable things to your thinking. We've been thinking a little bit about professional learning, and I suppose there's been an implication of my work on implementation that says, at the core, it's a lot about adult learning and unlearning. And it doesn't matter whether it's a teaching practice or a well-being practice or a behaviour practice or a collaboration practice. At some point, you're trying to change what adults do. And so what I want to do is pause here, and I want to build on some of the work from the Education Endowment Foundation and sort of really put at the core here. You know, in your SDP, how there's a whole section on professional learning? Have you noticed that? Just nod, trust me. There is. There's a whole section around professional learning, and the assumption is we're going to have to help teachers or other educators know things and do something differently. If teachers don't know something and do something differently, it's unlikely that any outcome is going to change for students. And I would say, by the way, as an outsider, 4 days in, or 3 days in, 3 days in, 3 days in, and then the day I'm trying not to remember on Sunday, you talk a lot about monitoring of student outcomes, but you don't do as much around monitoring the adult changes that would be required to get the changes in the student outcome. Is that fair? And so what I want to do is to help you have a lens about the professional learning work that you're doing. Because in that SDP part where you go, oh yeah, we'll do this professional learning, what it really should say is, here's the adult behaviour change strategies we're committing to. And that adult behaviour change is partially about building up teacher mental models. What we've learned in the past when we do professional learning, that's only about what teachers do and not enough about helping them understand why they should do something in a certain context, is they do a lot of terminal mutations to that word. And they'll start to do things like they'll just put up the learning intention on the board like we talked about before and just teach. Or they'll hear something about retrieval practice and they'll try to do low stakes quizzing even though they haven't done direct explicit instruction and built knowledge. So they try to retrieve knowledge but they haven't built that knowledge yet. They do a lot of weird things because they're just doing the thing you want me to do. But what we actually want to do is build their mental models. We want to build their long-term memory and understanding of the practice so they would understand what would work and under what circumstances. And then we want to help them not just know about something new, but change their habits. How long do you think you've been trying to implement formative assessment in Wales? 15, 20 years? I mean, you've exported the world's #1 person on formative assessment. We would have Dylan in Australia 20 days a year, at least. And we've had that for 10 years. At least since embedding formative assessments come out. How long have you guys kind of came up with all this? Pioneered it. Why is it so hard? There's a lot of learning and a lot of unlearning. Is anyone an ugly typer like me? Hands up if you're an ugly typer. So, who's down to like one finger and a thumb on one hand? It's very loud as well. If you grow up and in your formative time learn something that I would say is not evidence-based typing, and evidence-based typing would just mean that we've worked a way that's more efficient and faster given the design of the keyboard. Who's an ugly typer? Have you ever tried to stop being an ugly typer and be a fast typer? Yeah? And what happens is, okay, I'm going to do this. And it's like, you literally, how do I put that finger down? Has anyone found this? Like, it doesn't work. And then you stop because actually, even though you've got an evidence base, you know everything would be better for you. For the rest of your career, you'd be faster at everything you wrote. There is an evidence-based solution. It's free to access. Yet why don't you do it? Because for a period of time, you get much worse at doing what you're doing. And what you're doing is good enough for now, right? So too in teaching. Very little bad teaching. It's just a lot of like, that's good enough for now. And this is how I learn it during my formative time. And I just kind of keep doing that. And so in your implementation work, you need to be really clear about forms of professional learning that are likely to have an impact. So I often say, you know, we've got to move away, and I think Wales is really good on this. You've moved away from the sort of spray, the hosing version of professional learning. Bring in someone special who will say just the right thing to your teachers for 2 hours and it will be all over. And you've moved towards the irrigation system of professional learning, where many of you have a TLC or a PLC, you've got an instructional coaching model, and that idea that every educator is going to make some progress in their work every term. Who's got some of those structures, whether they're beautifully working or not? All right, 4 of us and 3 nods, great, okay. Are we just in a carb coma? Who's in a carb coma? All right. You're like, I'll have a bit of carb with my carb. I'll just put a little bit of room there, I'll put a bit of carb next to my carb. All right. Now, the Education Endowment Foundation did an updated review of the professional learning literature. It's been really, really helpful. Because before, we got stuck a little bit in types of professional learning. I do inquiry, or I do PLCs, I do TLCs, I do instructional coaching. But what you realise is, people say PLC or TLC, but they're doing 100 different things. People say instructional coaching, and they're doing anything from let the teacher decide what they might be interested in, to some sort of gym night, all the way through to something closer to what you'd see in hospitals where, hey, this is the next thing we need you to learn, we're going to model that, help you do it, and then demonstrate competence there. But we use the same term. And so what the evidence in EEF said is they said, let's talk about not just kind of the names, but let's try to get to the active ingredients. What are the things that really lead to that teacher learning and unlearning that really matters? And they would say, did anyone brush their teeth this morning? Is anyone a bit nervous? I think so. I think so. Maybe that's why the rest of the table moved away. They would say the difference between the mint flavour and the fluoride. The mint flavour's nice, but the fluoride does the benefit. And in professional learning, often the teachers say, oh, I love the mint flavour. But as leaders, you need to be really switched on to the fluoride. So in their report, they identified 4 key areas of professional learning and what they would call essential characteristics of professional learning. They say, stop saying I do instructional coaching, I do PLC. That's fine. What matters is how many of these essential characteristics are actually within the approach that you use. Here are the 4. 1, building knowledge. One of the things I would say in Scotland that I was telling them is there's really not much of a focus on building teacher knowledge here. In fact, I find it really interesting how many Western systems have fallen out of love with knowledge. They've done it for the kids, and they've done it for the adults. What we need is skills, but I hate to tell you, there are no functional skills without knowledge. But I want to teach critical thinking. Okay, what are the kids going to critically think about? I mean, that's laughable. No, we're not going to teach knowledge, we're going to teach creativity. Okay, creativity in what domain? No, we're going to teach general creativity. Okay. So if I taught a kid general creativity and then I bring them across here and put them in front of the piano, are they able to just riff like a jazz musician? Can I take them into my science classroom and they can think about new chemical compounds? Can I get them to come up with creative new ideas about the antecedents of World War I? No. Because they don't know their scales, they don't know the periodic table, and they don't have historical facts. And so we kind of gave up. It's quite interesting to me about these ideas around building knowledge for students. In Australia, we definitely went down this path. It's all about, I know what we're going to do. We're going to build skillful people who don't need knowledge because they can always look it up. But unfortunately, you have to have it in your long-term memory to be creative about, because creativity is often about recombining things. If you've just read it, it's in your working memory, and it's going to overload your working memory. So creative people know a lot of stuff. People who critically think have to have something to critically think about. Is this making any sense? Collaboration is very different in a football game as it is in a jazz group. To say it's sort of, oh yeah, it's just working with people, well, actually it's very, very different. And so we lost this idea of knowledge and domains, and we've done it too with how we teach teachers. We don't really talk about pedagogical content knowledge anymore. We don't really get into what would a teacher need to know and understand in mathematics to be an effective Year 4 mathematics teacher. And the answer is quite a lot. And that's why they're very, very ineffective at teaching mathematics. They're not helping our students have a conceptual understanding of multiplication. They may not have one either. Many of our teachers are really struggling with the combination of, like, how do I move between decimals, fractions, and percentages? They can't do it either. And so there's a whole bunch of knowledge about how students learn, about literacy and numeracy, that we've sort of just left out in the pursuit of what we would normally call inquiry professional learning. That starts with what's a teacher interested in or what's a problem, and they go and inquire into it. But inquiry is a terrible way to build knowledge. The best way to build knowledge is to get someone who's knowledgeable to explicitly tell you about that knowledge. Does that make sense? So what's fascinating is this is the first bit of professional learning evidence for a while that said we need to build teacher knowledge. And one of the ways to build the respect, I would say, of the teaching profession is for more people to trust that if you're a practicing teacher in Wales, that your parents can trust that they have the knowledge they need to teach this effectively. Knowledge. This is often, you've got to improve literacy, you've got to build teachers' knowledge of how humans acquire literacy in their first language, how they acquire literacy in their second language. And number two, you've got to motivate people. You've got to find approaches and ways to help people be motivated. Number three, teaching is a practice, so you've got to demonstrate techniques. You've got to actually develop the technique, and you've got to give them an ability to understand what it would look like in practice. And then you've got to help them embed the practice. So there's a great little tool that I've put into your pack. Have a little look. Someone's like, I just wrote that out. Are you serious? Have you got this? Oh, good. If you got this, you got the special version of the pack today. So I want you to have a think about different areas of professional learning you'll lead for teachers. Let's have a think. And if you're at local authority or regional level, you start to think about all the things we run for teachers, that you should think about which of them actually cover off these areas. So the Education Endowment Foundation would say, what you want to do is get professional learning has each of these four characteristics. Knowledge, motivation, developing techniques, and embedding practice. They say, if you look through here, you can have a look. Well, if I get knowledge and I motivate and I start the practice but I don't follow through, well, that's a little bit like my exercise regime. It actually ends up close to nothing. This is heartbreaking because often you're working hard, you're trying to get through lots and lots of people, but you don't get to the minimum effective dose. If you don't change the instructional habit, it's not that much difference. In fact, there's probably no difference in terms of changes in learner outcomes. Does that make sense? The teacher has the knowledge, they've been a bit motivated, they've started to do it, they've dropped off doing it. Isn't this formative assessment in Wales? They know it, they've been motivated, they started to do it, they didn't embed it. Not in your school, but other schools. What about this one? You get knowledge and motivation, but then you don't actually know what the technique looks like. You get lots and lots of this. Just the knowledge. Sometimes this one's interesting, D. You don't get the knowledge, but you get people really pumped up and you tell them to do the technique, but they don't understand why it would work under certain circumstances or not, so they don't have adaptive expertise. And of course the goal is here. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go through and think about each of these, and I want you to think about where have you seen this in your own professional learning work, or where is it turning up right now in your own professional learning offerings. Notice it doesn't say instructional coaching, TLC, PLC. It just says these are the mechanisms, and I don't really care what the thing it is you talk about or call it. It's what's happening in there that really matters. All right, turn into 2s and 3s. Use that table. See what emerges for you. Go for it. Hey, what do you think of this framework? Is it challenging? Like, I find this really challenging when I'm doing teacher professional learning. I think, I got that one, I didn't quite get there. Many of you might know of my teaching sprints approach. We're not looking at that today, but it's just an approach to do small team work. And as we had a look at this, we sort of think, yeah, it's pretty good on the knowledge building, because in the first step of a teaching sprint, we actually look at research and we spend a whole phase building knowledge, okay? Motivating, it was okay because it was about really trying to get short cycles of work, and we'd say just for 2 to 4 weeks. And we found doing something really short and sharp was quite motivating, especially if they could see a little impact. But developing techniques we were a bit weaker on. Often we were giving people research-based work, and we found things like Tom Sherrington's walkthroughs as a really good way of getting a really, has anyone seen those working? Yeah, good. Really, really clean description of what the technique was. That really improved the quality of what I was doing. And so then we got the walkthrough, and they'll say, yeah, but how do we help people practice that technique a little bit better? We were doing, in the sprint phase, you go practice. Do we need to include some instructional coaching or some modelling? And so bit by bit, I thought, oh, geez, I really need all 4. Then you start to realise if you don't get all 4, you don't change the instructional habit. And even though the teacher might walk around with some knowledge, as far as the learner outcome, there's no difference between doing nothing and doing 3 of them. Isn't that hard? And so, again, you'll hear lots of things from me today, just sort of saying, our work is so much more complex than we often talk about. And therefore, if that's what it takes to move teacher practice, then we really can only implement a small number of things and do them well and get it into embeddedness as an organisation and embeddedness into a program. So let's hope that you might want to take that away and play around with it. So, if you dig into this report, and we can send it through via Deb, I don't have this, but I'll just show you that what they say is that if you want to go a bit deeper, they've identified 14 key mechanisms. 14 key mechanisms that can help you elevate your practice in professional learning across any of those areas. So let me close out this section before we have a little look at the Agile leadership work. So the first one that I pull out a lot is managing teacher cognitive load. They're getting better and better at saying, not the 35 slides, but what is it that I need to learn, and how do I break up that learning into micro units? For the New South Wales curriculum reform, we built micro learning units that teachers could do 6 months before we were rolling out the curriculum to do knowledge building before anyone was touching a program or doing that work. We needed them to understand what were the real shifts, what could stay, what could be different, and we did knowledge building, but we did that as micro little bundle units, not someone coming up from the ministry going through a PowerPoint slide. Okay, you got it, everyone? You've got to go to the next school. But micro learning units you could do online, break them down into small bits. So do you need to manage your teacher cognitive load in the knowledge building? Another one was about motivation, and they say provide affirmation and reinforcement after progress. Again, for me, I try to build that in through a sprint model, which is say just do one thing, do it over 2 to 4 weeks, and help them see that movement. If you're running 9-month or 6-month inquiry action research projects, you've got to be really careful to make sure you're closing the loop, so people do something, they can see something, and they move something forward. And you definitely don't want the loop to be, oh, thank heavens we handed in that presentation. The reinforcement needs to come through I made a practice change and I can see some benefits from students. I made a practice change, I can see some benefits from students. We need to model targeted techniques, so what it looks like in the classroom. An early, easy way of doing that is things like walkthroughs. Even better is if you can have videos of teachers doing it from your context. And so buying out time for instructional coaching is costly. Buying out time for a quality teacher to record little snippets of what they're doing, if they're willing, and have that available. People go, ah, is that what you're talking about? We need to see what the technique really looks like in your context. And then, of course, prompting context-specific repetitions, which is just you need to practice in the classroom. So you need to practice your practice in your context. And so this is where in the sprint model, we ask you to try it out in context multiple times over 2 to 4 weeks until you can build it into your repertoire. So simple ways here of trying to upgrade our professional learning. And my real encouragement here is to say, hey, if you're going to embed anything seriously, then we seriously need to think about how to make this work. All right, let me move into the last couple of different things in Agile leadership and some of the other frames. Before I get into Agile leadership, because a lot of you are already experts in it, I just want to kick off with a frame. And I want to say, if you're going to make progress over the next couple of years, then one of the things that's really, really important is you just say, yep, we've got our goals, literacy and numeracy, we've got our goals, achievement, equity, we've got our goals in well-being and identity. Okay, what is actually the system to get us there? And so really, to sort of adapt that quote, I want to say you don't rise to the level of your school improvement goals, you fall to the level of your school improvement systems, tools and relationships. The systems, the processes, what happens every month and every week, particularly as a school improvement team and their school improvement partner or school improvement advisor or whatever you call them in your system comes together to do that work. Turn to the person next to you and say, to what extent do you agree? Go for it. To what extent do you agree? All right, I'm seeing a number of nods. I don't know whether it's just the hot afternoon after lunch and you're nodding off or you're in agreement. Just give me your hands if you feel like, yeah, that's probably about right. Like just reinstating, oh, we've got a goal, we've got a goal, we've got a gap, we've got a gap, we've got to close the gap. Did I mention we've got to close the gap and we've got the goal? We've got to do, yeah, just, that's great, put it over there. So what is the system and process that's going to get you there? And for me, if you want a summary of what some of us in the community have been exploring with Agile School Leadership, it just says, hey, we probably need a system or a process to help us make progress. And there's a certain rhythm and cadence about how work happens in schools where you've kind of got to get clear about what you're trying to do. Then you've got to take a bit of action. And then sometimes you've got to work out, oh, that's actually what we're really trying to do. You've got to update that thinking. And then from there, you've got to go and check how it's going. And bit by bit, you're actually realizing that most of what it looks like to improve a school is going to be much more iterative than linear. Does that kind of ring true for most people's experience?
Yes.
That it's messy and it's human and it's complex and you can make progress, but it's not like having the grand plan that you then deliver that and then you go, wow, look, I hit that outcome. It's much more like, I think I'm heading over there and I've got a good first bet. So I'm going to take a little bit of time, then I'm going to stop, I'm going to check where I am, I'm going to look around and say, what's next? And so the metaphor we use, it's much closer to sailing. That is, you can say, I want to be directionally correct, I want to head in that certain direction, and I want to move in the next steps. But before I get into kind of some of that content, because I know a lot of us have done this, I was thinking this morning about something that undergirds all of this, and particularly that undergirds this, you don't have this, so sorry, it was this morning. That undergirds whether or not this stuff works. I think this is going to be useful for those who've been in it and those who are new to it. And that is the notion of psychological safety. Do you know what that is? People talk about that here? So psychological safety is an interpersonal construct. It's a construct of teams or between people. Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School has really been the person who's brought this into the literature. She describes psychological safety as defined as a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. And she finds psychological safety being highly predictive of higher team performance across health, across technology companies, and I'm really interested in the way it plays out in education. My simple version of what this really looks like is that a psychologically safe team, or a psychologically safe local authority, or a psychologically safe relationship between head teacher and a school improvement partner would be this. As a professional, I'm safe to ask for help. I'm safe to admit a mistake, and I'm safe, independent of where I am in the hierarchy, to offer an alternative. So if you think about this in health systems, and then you can tell me whether it's useful to your context. In health systems, teams that have high degrees of psychological safety, you would have a young doctor in the NHS who's fully trained, couple of years in, but that comes across something that's difficult. Do you want that doctor to think, oh, I'm a professional, I should know? Or do you want him to reach out to the experienced nurse and say, hey, can you just help me on this one? Now, it may well be that that doctor is already getting paid more than that experienced nurse. It may well be that that doctor has been through multiple extra years of training. But who wants him to please ask the experienced nurse? So in a psychologically safe context, that person would say, I'm a professional, I need to ask for help. And the faster I do that, the more professional I am. But in other contexts, it's sort of like, I should know the answer to this. I'll just keep trying. Or health systems, the other one is admit a mistake. Particularly during something, if a medical practitioner is doing something to you and they realise that what normally works isn't working on you, do you want them just to have another go? Or do you want them to maybe seek a second opinion, bring in the medical team around them and sort of say, hey, look, it hasn't worked, can I bring you in? They don't have to say that to you, by the way. They have to say it to their team, their colleagues. And lastly, offer an alternative. This is particularly important in hierarchical elements, where you might have a top surgeon in a surgical theatre and a trauma nurse there who's like, well, actually, you're higher up than me, you're higher up in the hierarchy, but if they see something, you actually want that person to feel empowered to say, hey, I've noticed this, or might this be helpful? Hospital teams with high degrees of psychological safety have a higher reported number of incidences and better patient outcomes. So on their little maps, on the NHS, whatever else, they have high number of incidences that things didn't go as well today. Much better patient outcomes. Teams with low psychological safety have lower numbers of reported incidences and much worse patient outcomes. Where do you think we are in education in Wales? So I actually think underlying a lot of the work that I'm talking about here is about an openness to have a conversation, an openness to ask for help, an openness to admit a mistake, an openness to offer an alternative. And underlying a lot of the work of Agile, which is to get clear about what you really want to try to do some stuff, see how it went, change what you do, and update, I actually think there needs to be an underlying platform of this kind of safety. Does this make sense? All right. So turn the people around you, preferably whole table discussion if you can do it. Hey, how does psychological safety play out at the school level, the school to school improvement partner kind of relationship, and if you want to, school to inspection? Go for it. All right, well, what do you think? Psychological safety, a concept that you'd want to dig into a little bit more? It's one of those things that's a little bit more of an advanced concept, I think, for some who are into this work. But as we kind of just move into a 20-minute kind of overview here, refresher for some who've been in the work, and for others, a little bit of a prompt and invitation to join us in a shared set of tools and ways of working. I want to say that unless there's that platform built by the head teacher and then supported by the School Improvement Partnership, you actually find that people do a lot of performative work. And most of what we're going to look at here briefly for 20 minutes is just, and people in the room who've done this will say, it's really about the learning our way into the improvement, and we have to be very open to the fact things may not go to plan. So what I'm going to do, EAS has asked me to do a quick overview of some of these ideas. Would love for people who've had some experience, maybe when I ask if you want to put up your hand and tell us how it's been for you. I should also say, just make sure you don't go without giving us some evaluation from the day so far. And so if you'd like on your tables, one of the plastic ones, not the attendance form, but we'd love it if you use that QR code. Hey, so who's in a cluster? You're in a cluster? You know, one way to think about the work of a cluster, I think you're all in clusters, aren't you? You're like, oh, have to be, all right. We could do a whole bit of work on that. My organisation does the training for Victorian networks, and I've had a couple of conversations here about this idea that the point of a cluster isn't to say, yeah, I like you guys, we'll turn up, we'll do some things together just to show each other we're committed to each other. The point of a cluster is to accelerate the implementation of your SDP in a way that you could never do without each other. And so you've got to find a way, by the way, to be a network or a cluster of self-improving schools. So saying, what are you trying to do? How could we actually work in such a way that this would save us time, build capacity rapidly, not, what's something we could all endure and turn up at the same time? And then some of you are like, I'm only here not because I think I'm going to get anything out of it, but I just want you to all know I'm committed to you. And I'm so nice. But we've had to totally redo that and say, no, we're all committed to each other, and that's why we're going to do collective improvement work. And so maybe as we look at this, for some of you, don't just think about it from an individual school. Think about your cluster. Hey, get your cluster focused on work that's going to move things after doing some pruning. And I said to one colleague at the back, I said, clusters should only do what only clusters can do in the system. So EAS is really good at professional learning. Why are you running your own professional learning? You know, what is the one thing a cluster can do? And it's contextual-based support and capacity building in and around the things you're trying to do together. and get out of everything else and get into shared problem solving, get into each other's schools, and wherever possible, get the head teachers out of the way and build direct connections between mid-level leaders and lead teachers to do that kind of collaboration. Because if the poor head teacher always has to be there as the locus of collaboration, they will always be the limiting factor, and they are split attention and everywhere. But if you can get the collaboration happen at the next level down, it's powerful. And so that's why, for me, think about the cluster as the unit of improvement for working together. And then at every individual school, one of the things you'd want to do is to make sure you're building your improvement capability, okay? And for me, that's a dynamic improvement capability. Do you know how to get better? Do you know how to get better even when things are changing around you? Do you know how to identify for your school within the cluster, what's the thing you need to work on now? What is your school now ready to learn? And it's okay if you're ready to learn something else as a school. I'd expect you to be at different stages. What are you now ready to learn, and how are you going to overcome what I call the 3 most common improvement challenges? And the first is, you're not clear about what you're trying to do. As a team, as a school, and I want to say today is a little bit of an interesting way of looking at this work, as a cluster, you're not clear about what you want to do. You'll often say, what we want to do is to collaborate. Collaborate is not an ends, it's a means. It's a means to do something more efficiently. So what are you trying to do more efficiently through collaboration? People say, oh, we're trying to develop collective efficacy. What? You're trying to develop a shared belief that a group can have an intended impact? So what's your intended impact? And then we'll work out whether this group can have that impact. So one of the things is you might need to get clear, whether at the school level or, for those who are already doing that, at the cluster level. If you start off a little bit off and not all that clear, the 1 in 60 rule that pilots use say that, as you say, cause a plane to miss its target by 1 mile for every 60 miles flown. So if you're a little bit off target at the beginning, called September, and you can course correct now, that's great. But if you just leave it, oh, I won't say anything, I'll just turn up, bit by bit, you're going to get further and further away from anything that's worth doing. Some of you are very patient, and so you'll take this whole off journey all the way down, rather than interrupting anyone or saying, oh, I'm not sure about this. Who knows, they need to get a bit clearer at the school or the cluster level. You're like, should I put up my hand? Well, once you get clear about what you're doing, you've got to work out a way to get unstuck. The second problem of improvement is many people with good plans end up doing very little. They'll run the school, they'll get everything kind of moving, but they won't actually move something forward. You need a solution for how to get unstuck and how to get people making progress even when they're busy. And then lastly, you've got to work out every now and again, are you making any progress in the direction that you need? Because you're going to feel adrift. Who's ever felt adrift in cluster meetings halfway through the year? You're like, I like you all, I'm here for the collaboration, good chat over food, but I don't know, are we any closer to the outcomes we were trying to move than we were at the beginning? We're collaborating? Wasn't that the point? So one way of thinking about the Agile leadership framework is just to say it's one way of thinking about solving the 3 major problems in improvement, moving from strategic confusion to strategic clarity through clear thinking, moving from getting stuck to momentum through responsive action, and moving from feeling adrift or confused about where the heck we're up to being clear through lean monitoring. Just give me a wave if you've had any benefit from any of these 3, or if you haven't, just wave and leave, right? Just go, see ya. And the whole idea is you as a cluster, you as a local authority, you as a school could say, actually, we want to take off in a certain direction. So what we need to do is get 2 things. We need to be clear about what we're doing, and then we need to have a rhythm about how we get there. That's all you need. I need to be clear about what we're doing, and we need to have a natural rhythm about how we're going to make progress despite our busyness. So how do we get clear? Well, some of you in the room have heard this 3 times, but we've got to stop doing so many things. We've got to actually sit down and work out what the heck are we trying to do. What are we really trying to do? And often that's the cognitive heavy lifting of getting in, getting confused, and setting strategic direction. What's the simplest way to do that? Well, no surprises to people around. Do a clarify canvas. Your cluster should have a clarify canvas. Any core area of your SDP should be able to be turned into a clarify canvas. Anything that a local authority wants to do, I think should have to go through a Clarify canvas. Again, no one asked me for that advice, and you get what you pay for. A Clarify canvas is my, I'll speak fluent Australian here, BS detector. Including my own. What we can do is we can talk a lot with the right language, and especially at the higher up you can go, everyone use the right language. Oh, did I mention about how we want to have an impact? And, oh yeah, well what are you talking about? Can you please capture that, unpack it and try to sharpen it? 4 questions. Impact, problem, change, evidence. I don't care where you start. What's the impact you want to have and on whom? What's the difference you're trying to make for whom? That doesn't always have to be written in student outcomes. Often the impact might be, I want to build teacher knowledge about what Curriculum for Wales is all about. What's the problem we're trying to solve? Okay, well what is the deficit of knowledge that they don't have? Well, what's the misunderstanding that you're seeing turning up? What are the changes that will result in an improvement? What's the evidence? If I take this to a cluster level, which I'm trying for those who've been around, just give you a fresh way to look at this. When I'm working in clusters in Australia, what often they do is they pick a theme. They'll do things like, well, with the secondary school being very different to the primary school, let's work on agency. So they look for a lowest common denominator. Has anyone ever had this before? Let's work on well-being. Let's work on mathematics. We're all going to teach that, right? And it all sounds like you're working on the same thing until you get to the second meeting. You're like, yeah, but what are you actually working on? That's just a theme. And so what we would do is we'd take your SDPs and we'd say, in mathematics, what's the problem you're working on? And we cluster around problems, not around themes. So who's working on mathematics assessment, or who's working on an instructional model in mathematics? Who's working on this? And we actually say, not do we have a broad theme, but do we have a shared problem? Once we've got a shared problem, you've got to stop those people collaborating. Because they're actually like, wow, what are you doing? What's in your change box? Oh, we're thinking about this. Can I come and see what you're doing over there? Yeah, do you mind if we come? Yeah, sure, come and have a look. Host a visit, walk it through, move it through. You can actually accelerate the work. So my first kind of frame here, for those who are in the work, and please don't be confused, you can use this mostly for school level work, because we've got so many experienced practitioners in the room, I want to say maybe your next level of work is to help your cluster get to this level of clarity. Soon. Put it out and say, what are we trying to do? What normally happens is people say, well, we booked this speaker for October. That should fill up to a morning tea. Who's ever done that? I see a couple of them go. I wonder if he's free. Could he zoom in for it? No, I can't. You shouldn't have to. It's not about just having a little, like, it's fine if you want to have a kick-off speaker, don't get me wrong. But what's the problem you're trying to solve? Get into collaboration, get into the case studies, get into each other's schools, get in your middle level leaders. Clarification. And what you'll find, and what you're hearing all day, is a lot of you need to reduce scope. You need to reduce scope about what you're trying to do, and sometimes you might need to take out the chainsaw, or other times you need to take out the scalpel, and you need to get really, really clear about what you want to do. All right, turn to the person next to you, look them in the eye and say, get clear. Jeez. You wouldn't even knock cue. Come on. So, the first idea, for those who haven't been part of the work, what we would teach you if you joined our new cohort, or what you could learn absolutely easily by talking to 40 or 50 people in the room, is just that clear thinking liberates us from the own goals of doing work that should never have been done in the first place. Having a shared framework like the Clarify Canvas and an upgrade set of questions help you have respectful conversations at a cluster level, at a school level, at a team level, about what it is we're trying to do, and we move through iterations. You can then be kind to yourself and spread out which Clarify Canvases, that is, which improvement ideas will we do this year, as a team, as a school, as a cluster, as a local authority, which ones will we push into next year and the one after, because many of you who are running 3-year plans are trying to do a little bit of everything in year 1. And it makes a lot more sense to do things in sequence than in parallel. Schools are terrible at doing things in parallel, and they're pretty great at doing things in sequence. You do that, lock it in embedded, move to the next one, lock it in embedded, move to the next one. First idea is clear thinking. Second idea that is part of this framework, that would just give you a quick overview or a reminder, is responsive action. Why do we need to do responsive action? Because we often get stuck. We get stuck because we're so busy running the school, we get bogged down. What's the solution? The big idea is really simple. Work in cycles. Really easy. You say, don't think in years, think in cycles of 5 to 8 weeks, and in every term we're going to try to run one cycle of 5 to 8 weeks to push 2 to 3 meaningful things forward in each of the areas we're working on. We structure this work and we move it through. Who's run a couple of cycles before last year, or who's in a cycle now? Anyone? Yeah, great. Can you share a little bit about how you do cycles? Is that all right? All right, great. I heard them talking about it so well before. Who are you? Where are you from?
My name's Rachel Walters and I'm the PI lead for Blackwood Primary School.
How long have you been in Agile?
Since COVID, so 2020.
Tell us, how do you run cycles?
So to begin with, typically regarding Agile leadership, we use the Clarify Canvas to identify the problem that we're trying to solve. And then we move into then the rapid action plan, where we look at and schedule actions, and then we use stand-ups then as a self-evaluation process throughout the scheduled actions relating back to the rapid action plan.
100%. All right, round of applause. So, at the simplest level, you need to know that at that school, they're working through a series of cycles, and they help people have momentum and look at the next step by not overloading themselves and just picking a few things to do. You then heard some specific language about certain tools. They're in your toolkit, we can show you later on. And in those specific tools, we basically say, what we can do is we start off the cycle doing what we call a rapid action plan, where we get really tight about a few things we will commit to doing in 5 to 8 weeks. We then have a stand-up, which is a conversation about what have you done, where are you at, and what do we need to do next. And then we close out with a retrospective. And a retrospective helps us to really focus in on learning from what we've done. It's like a little bit of a self-evaluation, but it's happening on a regular 5 to 8 week cycle in and around the work that you're doing. And so the people in the room here who are working with us in the sort of follow-up work and what we would teach you to do if you joined us is actually this term, closing out a short cycle, having a nice rest in October, and then running your next cycle into the Christmas break. And those schools are going to find themselves hitting Christmas saying, it's been crazy busy, and we've got a few things moved. And they'll look at each other and say, nice job, rest well, see you on the other side. Other people will think, oh my goodness, half the year's already up. We haven't really moved anything forward. I mean, we've been running the school, it's amazing, but we haven't moved anything forward. So can I get you to flick ahead a little bit? I want you to just have a quick look at the retrospective for me. We didn't look at this yesterday, so I don't feel as bad making you do it, team. Can someone yell out the page that it's on? 16. Okay, everyone pull up the retrospective. Here's what I want you to do. Retrospective takes about 25-30 minutes. You only do a retrospective in one area at a time, so you can pick one of your SDP areas, particularly something in teaching, learning, or assessment and curriculum. And the idea is you're going to work through these questions, and the core idea is you're going to be better than last time next term. So you're actually going to learn through, you're going to learn what's working and what's not working, and you're going to have this conversation. Here's what I'd love you to do. Could you have a look at this, read through the questions, and could you circle 3 or 4 questions that you think would be particularly useful to ask your team at the end of this term? Read through the questions and then just circle the numbers of 3 or 4 of them that are particularly useful. You think, yeah, we should use those in an end of term retrospective this term. Go for it. All right, let me pause you. You like the questions? I'm not giving you anything that you don't already kind of know how to do. I'm not giving you anything that you couldn't, if you're really at your caffeinated best, just say to a team. What happens if it's week 9 and you're a bit tired and you kind of just feel like it would be easier just to close out the term and just, let's all have a rest, we'll pick this up next term. And you don't pause for 20 minutes to learn from what's done or not. And then next term, you just make the same mistakes. So what I'm about is what you can do in 25 minutes or less. And you don't have all 25 minutes, which I don't laugh at. I'm like, yeah, I know what that feels like. Could you give me 18? Well, I'm not sure. Could you give me 12? Could you give me 8? All right. Ask 3 questions. You just chose 3. We could do that in 8 minutes, maybe 9, 3 minutes each. Say, hey everyone, we're only talking about this part of our SDP. If you like, you could say, do you mind if I record this so we could just really speak very quickly? If you'd rather not, that's fine. Like just audio recorder on your phone. And I want to rapidly go through this with you. 9 minutes. Who's benefiting more or less from this? Who chose that one? It's a variability question. Improvement science is all about it. Don't be interested in that anecdotal fallacy. Ooh, that's really good over here. Yeah, but who's not getting it? Or what didn't we implement as effectively? That just gets to it. Someone else can spend 9 minutes talking about all the things they've done. Who's got one of those people in their team? Who is that person in the team? And I've done this and I've done that. Oh, we're out of time. No learning done. Just straight away. What didn't we implement as effectively as planned? Who's benefiting more or less? Are there any unintended consequences? Are there some things that are more effective than others? And for some, we just have to do it well considered. I'm not sure. Okay, let me write that down. Thanks everyone, got some notes. When we come back next term, we pick up the rapid action plan. Let's just reactivate this. That'd be a really light touch. Not a very good, but better than nothing. Other people, 25 minutes, a week before, email goes out to the team. We're doing a proper retrospective on this. Please bring relevant data with regards to teacher knowledge, practice, whatever else that you'd like to bring to the discussion. We're up on a wall and we're having it. And even better, a school improvement partner is there with you, listening in a high degree of psychological safety, because rather than you having a one-on-one, you're right, I'm learning this. What am I meant to say when you say that, by the way? You're right. I'm not meant to tell you how I am, right? Is it? No, you're just meant to say it back. But no one's interested. Like if you say, you're right, and I say, well, actually, I didn't sleep very well, and I didn't. You think, what are you doing? Like, what does it mean? It just means like, hiya, is it? Like, you're right. So you don't even respond to it. You just say it back. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you. Yeah. It's very British. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. No, thanks. That's good. You're right. Just. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Do you want to know anything else? No. The British. It's good. Okay. So I just want you to feel really relaxed about, oh, has Simon just saved me 90 minutes? Has Simon just saved me 40 minutes? Oh, if we did this all the time, when I'm away, because I've got to fill up something, or someone in the local authorities calls to meeting, I say, I'm going to miss the retrospective. Run it. Deputy principal's going to run it. The tool is the same. Capture it. You don't have to be always there. You can keep it moving on. All right. And then the last thing is, you might have noticed that the third set of questions are all about evidence. And I'm always in tension here. It's like, oh, should you do a retrospective without evidence? And I always think, yes. You're better off talking about how it's going, even if you don't have additional evidence, and just acknowledge that you're talking anecdotally, and there might be all sorts of errors in your answers to question 3, compared to if you strengthen that through the use of additional evidence. But always run a retrospective, even if you don't have additional data. And just know that you're sort of running a retrospective of anecdotal experience. Even better, how good would it be to sit down for a retrospective and have tracked some stuff? Oh, now we're talking. School improvement partners like, this is the best day I've ever had. I've joined a team who's invited me for a retrospective about their core numeracy improvement that's connected to a cluster group that they're working on, and they've brought evidence of teacher change. Right? Anyway, they'd be in another world. Because you see, this stuff takes time, and all they really care about is schools that are being really clear and open and transparent and metacognitive about what they're doing. But honestly, nothing matters beyond a school leader saying, yeah, we kind of know what we're trying to do. So with all this tension, we kind of did this in the last 8 weeks. Now we're having a really open conversation about what really happened, and then we're going to learn from that and try to do a little bit better next term. I mean, what else can anyone ask of you? If there's a head teacher doing that with their team, you're as good as it gets. And so what you're doing is just checking in, hey, we're 9 weeks in, are we off track? And even more so, where are we off track? Are we off the pace? And we're like, well, we lost that week, and then someone else had to fill in for camp there, and that didn't go so well. No one's fault, no one's blame, there's no blame. Just like talking honestly about what it is. And so for me, it's all about tracking lead indicators. And some people in the room are getting really into this. They're geeking out on tracking lead indicators. I've got a cheat sheet in there for you, and also a simple way of trying to help people collect some evidence. But at the core, it's just saying, hey, what would we expect to have changed by the end of this term, and how could we know about it? And this is the simplest thing. I just get teams to go, hey, if we do this stuff this term, what do you reckon we'll see at the end of this term? And then if that's going all right, You all right? Then, a little later, we should see something else. And that's it. You guys have confused yourself in monitoring and evaluation and impact. It's like all anyone can ask you to do is do some stuff based on evidence that solves a real problem, do it for about 5 to 8 weeks, and then see whether or not the changes you'd expect to change by now are happening. And then do that again for another 5 to 8 weeks, and do that again for another 5 to 8 weeks, and you'll make some progress. The alternative is you say, I've got to evaluate myself in a really deep way, I've got to probably, and then it feels judged, it's got to be really, really rigorous, and so we just avoid doing it. We procrastinate, and then it gets late, and then someone puts some pressure on us, and we're like, oh, what about this? Is this self-evaluation? But teams that do this every 5 to 8 weeks find it easy. They're looking for the lead indicators, teacher knowledge, teacher language change, teacher trialing of a practice, teacher incorporating something in their planning, and they're looking for the rumble strips. That is, they're really open and honest about things that aren't working now, because they want to know them really, really early. But to bring all this together, those who kind of get this, they know that the tools are a use it when useful. But the main thing is that you find a rhythm and a cadence as an improvement team. You know when you do thinking together, you know when you take action together, and you know when you're doing some lean monitoring together. There's no surprises about it. There's no sense of, oh, we haven't done one of those, we should do one of those. It's just like, it's in the schedule. It's boring. Good boring. Like, we know what we eat for dinner on a Wednesday night, boring. We do it, simple, default growth. And if you can do that, you start to realize that the schools that make a lot of progress are mostly schools that don't just sort of somehow say, hey, we should do something. They just set up their routines and they trust them. And they do them each and every term, and it's not a big deal, it's not really stressful, and after a couple of terms, they make more progress than the other ones running around trying to do 1,000 things in a shallow way. All right. Well, can I just say thank you so much for the invitation to come and join you, and thank you for making the big effort to come here. Can you just make some eye contact, not just with your own table, but awkwardly from someone from another table? Just give them a little nod, give them a smile, a round of applause. Yep. All right. My hope is that you start to realise that in education systems, no one's got the full answer. No one above you has any better idea about what's going on than you. Hate to tell you. And so what it really takes is a system like yours and people at all levels to say, hey, you know what? That idea of pruning makes sense. Let's just start to do it. And as we use the term more, and we tell other people how we prune, that gives them license to prune. Second idea today was stop talking about impact and start talking about implementation. And anyone who goes on about impact better be able to talk about implementation. Or they might want to talk a little bit less and get on the ground a bit more. Because what we need is people to say, I want to get impact via this journey. I want to get impact via this implementation journey. And I reckon using a 4E, adapting it, adjusting it, making it yours, shared view of implementation could be a great way to support your staff feel confident and for your ideas to have legitimacy. Professional learning is going to be part of that. Don't stuff around with light touch professional learning that people think is nice. It's just the mint flavour of your toothpaste. Go after some things that are deep and strong, and there's some great examples, particularly through the walkthroughs I know that have happened in some of your clusters. And then this afternoon is sort of just saying, how are you going on your formulation, your implementation, and your checking in of your SDP? And if you think you're going after too many things, you don't really know how to take action from those things, and you find their review stuff really stressful, let us help you out. Because actually, we've got some processes and tools that they're not simplistic, they're just really simple, because we've taken them through so many versions of getting it wrong, and tested it on lots of other people until it's getting right down to something that's usable, and we'd love to share those ideas with you. So thanks everyone. I'm going to hand over to Deb to bring us to a close.
Well, a huge thank you to Simon. This is probably the last time we'll have a formal audience to say thank you, so I do want to say a few thank yous, and firstly, and most importantly to Simon, you know, he's been in Scotland. I won't ask him whether Scotland or Wales was the best part of this trip, but I'm sure you'll agree that, well, personally, and James, I think I've had a week of intense coaching, if I'm honest. I've learnt loads, and every time Simon addresses us, shares his thinking, And I said right at the start around the complexity of school improvement and leadership. I learned something else. It makes me think twice about what I've perhaps known for a long time, and helps me think about how I can support others in my role, but also how we can work together on driving that improvement in a very purposeful way forward. So a huge thank you, Simon. I really appreciate all your hard work, and thanks for putting up with us this week. It's been brilliant. Okay, big thanks to Business Support for all their help this week. Really appreciate it, and to all the EAS members of staff who've helped bring the last few days together. Huge thanks to those school leaders who welcomed and opened their doors for our visits. So a huge thank you to you. It was really a highlight of the week, and thanks for the time spending with us and sharing your leadership journeys. So just a final thank you. It's like the beginning of the end, isn't it? We've had another time for us to reflect on our work, and I hope that you work with us on your next steps in terms of your leadership journeys. There's been lots of lessons that we can take forward in our work, and hopefully we'll come back together to reflect together as a group, and maybe we can share that in the future with Simon. So diolch yn fawr. Have a safe journey home, and not so long for the weekend now, but thanks once again for all your time. And final, can we give him a warm goodbye and hwyl fawr, and hopefully you'll come back and see us soon. Diolch yn fawr, Simon.